Tonight, as the skies close their last streaks of light and the world begins to slow down, I welcome you to another journey among us. One not to find something new, but to realize what has always been present that we have often forgotten. Tonight, you'll enter the land of ancient knowledge, jewels handed down through generations by enlightened masters. Those who understand how to soothe a restless mind, heal a tired heart, and open up a kind of quiet yet profound peace like a stream flowing through thousands of years of rock. If you want, you can say where you are, whether you're sitting or lying down, and what setting you're listening in. But it's not as important as allowing yourself to be truly present. Because as we go through this long story, you will feel that the silence does not come from words, but from the space between words. Peace is not created, but revealed, as if you were just wiping away a thin layer of dust that covers a treasure that is always present in the center of your being. Zen stories from ancient times always carry with them powerful teachings that can change the way we perceive anxiety, stress, or relentless searching. They are not ordinary stories. They are pieces of memories preserved through generations of teachers and students, transmitted by a voice as soft as the wind through the bamboo forest, by the slow footsteps of a person who has seen the true nature of life. Lao Tzu once said, "At the center of who you are, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want." The deeper you go into tonight's story, the more you will feel that it is not a philosophy, but a life experience. So let your body settle down completely. Take a deep breath. Keep and exhale. That's it. You will see the sound of thoughts begin to calm down, like the surface of a lake calming down when the wind stops blowing. And as our minds open up, let's enter the story of searching and of the beauty of not seeking at all. In the remote mountains of ancient China, where the mist wrapped around the pine trunks like silver silk strips and small streams carved into stone, the ruins of time, there was a small monastery nestled among the many stone steps that bent around it. There, Master Shao, who was known throughout the region not for his power, but for his quiet presence, lived a life that drifted to the beat of a broom sweeping the yard, the morning tea, and the ringing of bells in the late afternoon. One morning, when the dew was still dripping on the leaves, a young monk appeared on the steep path leading to the monastery gate. He had walked for weeks, his feet worn out by the rocks, his robe covered with road dust, but his eyes were full of hope. During the journey, he heard many people talking about this place. They say that near the monastery there is an ancient stone bridge, a wonder of spiritual architecture, a structure that is seen as the boundary between the mundane and the sacred. Many people say that just by seeing it, a person can deeply understand the nature of life. As he approached the monastery, the young monk saw the bridge from afar. It didn't look like a wonder as he had imagined, just a rudimentary, somewhat rugged stone bridge with weathered wooden railings. It looks old, casual, even so ordinary that it can be easily overlooked. But the monk's heart boiled with excitement. He believes that simplicity is definitely symbolic of profound sesuatu. When he entered the courtyard, he saw Master Shao sweeping the leaves. Each stroke of his broom was as light as caressing the ground, and every movement exuded an indescribable grace. The young monk bowed his head deeply. "Master Bai," he said with a voice trembling with nervousness, "I've come a long way to get here. I have heard many stories about his famous stone bridge, which is mentioned as a spiritual wonder throughout the country. I wish to understand its deep meaning. Please teach me." Master Shao stopped his hand, looked up at him with eyes as deep as an ancient well. He replied softly, "It allows donkeys to cross. It allows the horses to cross." The young monk was confused, but tried to restrain himself. Surely it was the beginning of a profound lesson. He asked again, his voice trembling slightly, "Master Bai, what you mean is not his function. I want to know the spiritual nature that makes it famous. Its design must contain something very mysterious." Master Xiao put down the broom, his eyes full of tenderness but steadfastness. "It allows donkeys to cross. It allows the horses to cross." This time his voice did not change even a little. The young monk began to feel a rising sense of frustration. He was tired. He had expected a lot. He had come here with dreams of the great truth. Therefore, he can no longer hide his frustration. "But master, it's the famous ancient bridge. It is spoken as a sacred symbol, a wonder that is celebrated throughout the monasteries. It must have something deeper." Master Shao smiled, his smile as light as the wind blowing through the teacup. "That's right. It is made of stone and wood. It has stood there for generations. It helps the road user carry the burden to cross the other side safely. It still stood firm despite the rain and storm. What else do you want it to be?" The young monk was silent. That answer, so simple that it's almost rudimentary, penetrates him again. His mind was like a door that was suddenly opened by the wind, revealing a space behind him that he had never seen before. He realized he was looking for something complicated, mysterious, a truth wrapped in metaphor. He wanted the bridge to be a symbol of enlightenment, of great truth. But Master Shao had shown him that the deepest essence lay right in front of him. Simple, unobtrusive, undemanding service. The bridge doesn't care who passes through it, rich or poor, horses or donkeys. It is just it, complete in its own function. The young monk felt that something was calming down in his heart. For the first time in weeks, he felt as light as if he didn't have any questions with him. The Buddha once said, "It is better than 1,000 empty words that bring peace." From the lesson of the bridge, the young monk recognizes human habit, always looking for complexity when the simple already contains it all. We live in a world that believes that truth must be sublime, must be distant, must be hidden in ritual and philosophy. But Zen pointed to what was right in front of him. The seeking mind, what makes people run hill after hill, read book after book, practice method after method, is what causes us to miss the obvious truth. Reality is perfect in its very existence. Every day we walk over many bridges. The breath feeds us every minute. The morning cup of tea wakes us up. The friend listens to us without judgment. The ground supports our every step. But we look for something farther away, thinking that peace must be something special, when it is the most ordinary thing. We divide our lives into sacred and mundane, important and trivial, memorable and too familiar. But those labels are just the fog of the mind. Reality is not divided. Master Shao's stone bridge is the embodiment of what Zen calls as it is. Everything is itself, perfect when it is itself. Do not add or subtract. No implications, no icon. It does not need to represent the path of enlightenment. It is the path, minute by minute, for anyone to step on. Zen Master Hongba once said, "Daily consciousness is the way." That is to say, it is not the extraordinary experience that brings us to peace, but it is the breath, the footsteps, the morning and the evening, the sweeping of the yard, washing the dishes, cooking, listening, walking, standing, lying down, sitting. It's all the way if we're really there. And the Buddha reminded, peace comes from within. Don't look for it outside. When we see that, we no longer ask for bridges to be anything other than bridges. We no longer require our circumstances to be more sacred in order for us to be at peace. No more waiting for a special moment to live to the fullest. I just live. And in that life, there is enough. The story that the young monk took with him to leave the monastery that day was not one of a miraculous bridge, but of miraculous simplicity, something that people often shy away from, believing that the path to inner freedom must be complicated. But sometimes the biggest lesson is encapsulated in the simplest of sentences. It allows donkeys to cross. It allows horses to cross. As you finish this story, you may feel the same way the young monk felt, a subtle tenderness that permeates your body. Part of your mind is searching less, chasing things farther away, and starting to see the beauty of what's happening right now. Take one more breath. Exhale slowly. And in that budding stillness, let your heart understand that peace is never far away. It is the bridge you walk across every day. It is the breath you have. It's the story you just heard. And it is this moment. Simple, complete, full. Tonight, as you settle into the gentle stillness of this moment, perhaps you will realize that the divine has never been far from you. It does not hide in wonders, nor does it hide behind elaborate rituals or secret teachings. It often stands right in front of you, as simple as your breath, like a bed that supports your body, like a roof that shelters you from the rain and wind, like a steady breath that carries you from one moment to another. These seemingly ordinary things are actually silent bridges, old but loyal friends, giving you their existential gift that never demands attention or gratitude. The Buddha once said that thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle without reducing the lifespan of that candle. Happiness, like peace, is never diminished when shared. And just like that, the ancient stone bridge in the previous story shares its power with anyone who walks through it, regardless of the owner or the value of the journey they bring. It serves forever, undiminished by that very service. As we learn to see the sacred in the simple, we discover the strange and tender truth that peace has never been hidden from us. We're just looking in the wrong direction. We always look too far, while what we are looking for is right in this breath, in this hand, in our own little footsteps. And now, as a stream continues its journey, the next story quietly unfolds. This story is about the subtle but decisive difference between conceptual understanding and direct action, between knowing something with your mind and actually living it with your whole being. In the ancient halls of Master Guan Yanmu's monastery, the morning light shines through the wooden walls, creating soft streaks of light like wave patterns on the floor that wears the footprints of generations of monks. Hundreds of early morning meditation steps have carved a wordless history on every grain of wood. It is a place where stillness is not something that is created, but something that every heart has gradually learned to blend into. Today was a special day at the monastery. The head of the monastery, an elderly monk who had devoted his life to guiding generations of monks, now wished to retire to a small mountain hermit to live the last years of his life in absolute silence. Therefore, a successor must be chosen. How many wonder what the challenge will be? Will it be mastery of the scriptures, the ability to meditate deeply, or philosophical apologies? But Master Gishan, the current leader, did not choose any traditional methods. Instead, he chose a simpler path, as if he wanted the entire monastery to return to its roots. He summoned all the monks to the main hall. The brown robe rustled gently as they entered, making a sound like the wind blowing through the reeds. They stood in a circle, silently waiting. The atmosphere thickened with curiosity and anticipation. Master Gishan walked over to a wooden cabinet, opened it, and took out a terracotta water jar, the kind that the monastery uses every day to store water from wells. There is nothing special about it. The surface is rough. The mouth of the jar is slightly chipped. The color of the soil is dark because of years of use. But it is that mediocrity that makes everyone even more curious. He placed the vase down in the middle of the circle. The morning light shone on the surface of the vase, reflecting off a faint halo, making it look almost dignified in a very humble way. The monks looked at each other, wondering where the challenge lay. Master Gishan looked around the hall, his gentle but bright eyes as if he could see through every shell of thought. He spoke slowly, his voice deep but clear in the space. "Don't call this a water bottle. Tell me what it is." The air instantly became dense. The young monks sat motionless slightly, partly out of anxiety, partly because of the emotion of realizing that this was a meditation test. The challenge hung between them like incense, like a question that language could not explain, but which the intuition could answer. Moments later, the chief priest, who had spent most of his life studying the scriptures, commentaries, and records of the ancient masters, walked out of the circle. His robes were well-groomed, his face was solemn, and his confident demeanor was that of an acquaintance who held a leadership role and had overcome countless philosophical debates. He bowed his head slightly and said, in a low voice, "Master, it can't be called a piece of wood." An answer has a philosophical style, using negation to avoid saying the forbidden word and to show that you understand the impersonal nature of things. The answer seemed well thought out, wise, and consistent with the style of speech common in ancient Zen conversations. But Master Gishan remained silent. No nodding, no smiling, no expressing objection. He just looked. The silence made the chief priest begin to shake his faith, and the other monks were even more unsure of what to do next. At this time, from the end of the hall, near the kitchen area where the aroma of cooked rice mixed with the smell of wood smoke, there was the sound of footsteps. It was Yang Shan, the monastery's cook. He is a young monk from a humble background, not outstanding for his philosophical knowledge, but outstanding for his hard work, humility, and calloused hands, because he chops vegetables, washes pots, and carries water every day. His robe was strewn with a few streaks of rice flour, a few streaks of grease, a testament to the work rather than to perfection. He stepped forward without hesitation, without presentation, without hesitation. He looked at the vase. Just a second. It's as if he's looking straight at reality, not through any conceptual layer. Then he put his foot out and gently kicked the vase aside. The jar rolled on the wooden floor, made a round sound like an earthen bell, and then stopped. And without saying a word, Yang Shan turned away, returning to the kitchen to continue the unfinished work. A deeper silence fell over, but this time it was not embarrassment, but realization, understanding. Master Gishan gave a rare, bright smile, and then let out a laugh so pure that the birds outside were startled slightly. He said, "Our chief priest has lost. The next person who will lead our community is Yang Shan." No one was offended. No one is dissatisfied. They saw a flash of light in that moment, a revealing truth that could not be expressed in words. Yang Shan did not talk about reality. He acted in reality. He did not describe the vase. He met it directly in an instant, without any concept. The Buddha said, "No matter how many holy words you read, how many wonderful things you say, they will be of no use if you don't live by them." Those words suddenly flooded into the heart of every monk, like the sound of waves crashing on the sandy shore. In our daily lives, many times we try to explain instead of act. We turn every situation into a problem to analyze, a problem to deduce. But in the midst of our thoughts, we forget the simplest thing. Life happens now, not in the patterns we build in our heads. Meditation calls this discerning mind, an aspect of the mind that is always categorizing, explaining, naming, analyzing, but rarely actually encountering reality. This function is necessary in many things, but it becomes a barrier when we want to live life to the fullest. Look at your own life. How many times have you analyzed too much instead of taking a simple action step? How many times do you interpret a person's feelings instead of listening to them? How many times do you think about doing something instead of starting right away? Our society celebrates clever explanations, complex theories, conceptual stones that sparkle like treasures. But sometimes wisdom lies in something so simple that we don't realize, to act in accordance with reality the moment it happens. The chief priest's answer, though profound, was still only a game of the mind. It uses the concept to talk about non-conceptuality. It uses the concept of empty brains. But Yangshan's kick was different. It comes from natural wisdom, from unentanglement, no ostentation, no attempt to appear meditative, no attempt to impress. It's just the exact action in that moment, no more, no less. A Zen master once said, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf." This is exactly what Yangshan did. He did not stand to think about the nature of the vase. He doesn't try to create an excellent explanation. He simply responds to the situation with the most natural action, kicking it away to break the concept, freeing reality from the name that one wants to put on it. That vase is a symbol of many situations in our lives. Times when we need to act, not reason. Times when we need to be silent, not justify. Times when we need to listen, not talk. Times when we need to hug the person in front of us instead of analyzing their feelings. Meditation does not call for the elimination of thoughts. It only teaches us to recognize that thought is a tool, not an owner. When the situation needs to think, we think. When the situation calls for action, we act. When the situation needs to be let go, we let go. Wisdom is in conformity, not in intelligence. The Buddha once said, "Chaos is inherent in everything complex." And tonight, when you listen to this story, you probably feel it too. You may be living in the midst of invisible vessels, situations that require you not to analyze it further, but to do the simplest, truest thing. Can you trust your own intuition? Can you encounter reality without covering it up with interpretation? Three things cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And that truth sometimes is exposed in a very light kick to an old water jug. When you learn to react directly to reality as it is, you will find that the intellect has never been in a complicated place. It lives, breathes, moves in the very unobtrusive simplicity of this moment. In the stillness of the evening, when the breath of the world seems to slow down by a beat and the darkness embraces everything with its gentle hands, we continue our journey with a story of the nature of true spiritual fulfillment. A story not only to hear, but also to reflect on ourselves. In a secluded valley, where mountains rise like sleeping giants and the morning mist dances around the soaring pine forest, there is a small hermit hidden under the dark green canopy. It is not decorated with golden statues or shimmering lights. It was just a simple wooden hut. But for 20 years, a devoted monk made this place his whole world. Believing that absolute solitude, persistent meditation, and strict discipline would help him achieve complete liberation from all worldly bondage, he chose to move away from the bustling towns, away from the laughter of people, away from the warmth of genuine encounters, to concentrate on the path that he considers the most sacred. His routine never changed. Every day, he woke up before dawn, sat quietly in meditation for hours in the thin cold of the morning, ate a simple meal just enough to sustain his body, and then spent most of the rest of his time studying ancient texts. He trained his mind to remain immobile in the face of all changes, cultivating what he believed to be profound equality, a state of mind that he considered to be superior to all mundane emotions. Gradually, he reached a level of silence that made it seem to outsiders that he had broken free from the bonds of humanity. His reputation for spiritual attainment spread far beyond the valley to the ears of a wealthy merchant who had funded his practice for 2 decades. The long years of support led the businessman to begin to wonder whether his investment would really bring true wisdom or merely foster an illusion of spiritual cloaking. To test it, instead of visiting the hermitage himself, he secretly enlisted the help of a young woman who was famous for her beauty and grace. He asked her to play the role of a lost traveler, asking for shelter to see how the monk would react to the unexpected situation. As darkness descends on the forest and the sounds of daylight fade into the silence of the night, the woman approaches the monk's hut. Her appearance was brilliant, but unobtrusive, and her appearance was both elegant and fragile. At the door of the hut, she hesitated a little, as if afraid that her appearance would disturb the practitioner who was quiet inside. When her footsteps made a soft noise that caught the monk's attention, he walked out of the door with an unchanging expression, calm, solemn, as if everything in the world could not shake the inner self he had cultivated. She bowed her head respectfully. "Sir, I am lost in the mountains. It was dark and I was afraid to go on. Please give me shelter for the night. I don't need much, just a small corner to sleep safely." The monk looked at her with eyes as silent as the surface of a winter lake. Years of training made him believe that he had overcome all the temptations, all the emotions, all the weaknesses of mortals. He nodded, showing her a place to stay near the fireplace. Throughout the evening, the woman relentlessly challenged his composure without being vulgar or provocative. She talked about the outside world, the music, the paintings, the bustling festivals, the sincere friendships, and the warmth of humanity that he had left. She talked about the loneliness that a life of seclusion carries, and asked him if he ever felt empty without the presence of other people in his life. She did not reproach, nor seduce. She only sowed into the space gentle but penetrating questions, like someone knocking on the door that the monk had locked for years. The small hut seems to be changing. The space that was cold is now filled with the warmth of people, by the voice of life, by the vibrancy that the monk has long extinguished himself. As the fire in the furnace drew near and the darkness in the room grew softer, she drew closer to him. Laying her hand on his shoulder with natural delicacy, she asked softly, "Right now, in this moment, what do you feel?" The monk took a deep breath, using all his years of cultivation to maintain immobility. "A withered old tree grows on the cold rock," he replied in an absolutely expressionless voice. "In the death of winter, not a drop of warmth flows through its branches." The woman was silent immediately, bowed respectfully, and left for the night. She returned and reported to the merchant every word he said. When the merchant finished listening, instead of admiring, he was furious. He rode through the night to the hermitage, and as soon as it was just daylight, he gathered dry wood around the hut and lit a fire. The fire raged, burning everything the monk had considered his achievement for 20 years. In the midst of the crackling fire, the merchant shouted, "20 years! 20 years I spent money raising a person who didn't understand anything about true wisdom. Your answer proves that you still distinguish between the pure and the impure, the sacred and the earthly. You are proud of your coldness, confusing insensitivity with liberation. A truly awakened person will feel the natural warmth of human beings for a lost traveler, compassion for the one who is afraid, and kindness for the one who needs help. You don't. You wither yourself and think it's enlightenment." The monk stood silent, watching the place where he had been attached for 2 decades being burned to ashes. But what struck him was not the loss, but the words uttered by the merchant. Each word like an arrow piercing the ascetic shield he had erected to protect the spiritual self he didn't know he was raising. "True emptiness," the merchant said slowly, "is not the absence of emotions, but the ability to receive all emotions without being imprisoned by them. Detachment is not cold. Detachment is the freedom to react authentically to each moment without being dominated by prejudice. You are not a dry tree, and the fact that you believe yourself to be a dry plant is proof of how far you have strayed from the truth." The fire faded, leaving ash flying in the wind. In that stillness, the Buddha's teachings echoed in the monk's mind. 3 things that could not be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. It was in this moment that he realized the truth he had avoided. He had never reached equality. He just turned off his ability to feel and thought it was liberation. This confusion is not unique to him. In their spiritual journey, many people have fallen into the trap of ignoring spirituality, using noble concepts to avoid confronting real emotions, real fears, real wounds. People think they're letting go, but they're actually just holding back. Thought they were awakening, but they were just freezing their minds. True renunciation, upanakshaya, is not to get rid of the emotion, but to let it flow through like a breeze, not holding on, not resisting, not clinging. An enlightened heart is not a cold heart, but a heart that is so open that it can feel it all without being swept away by anything. The woman in the story is a symbol of life, beautiful, fragile, complex, unpredictable. When she asked the monk what he felt, it was not just a question between 2 people, but a question of life for all of us. When life comes near and touches you, how do you react? Many, like monks, retreat into the guise of the ideal. They use knowledge to replace direct experience, thoughts to replace emotions, and coldness to hide their fear of the uncertainty of life. But as Pema Chodron once taught, the root of suffering is trying to find certainty in a world where the only certainty is uncertainty. Practicing meditation is not meant to turn us to stone. It teaches us to be water, quiet but alive, still but sensitive, to be able to stand still in the lake, and also to roll along the stream. When the heart is no longer frozen, compassion naturally appears. The Buddha once said that infinite love is like motherhood for one's only child, natural, untrying, uncalculating. At this point, the monk realized that the equanimity he had always pursued was just a cover. True serenity is the ability to open up to a woman lost in the night, feel her fragility, and respond with warmth, not with the metaphor of a dead tree. The fire that night consumed the hut, but at the same time it burned the false spiritual shell to which he had bound himself for 20 years. Only when everything he clung to turned to ashes did a void open. Not a cold emptiness, but a void full of possibility, where truth could enter. And he began to understand that the spiritual path was not to leave the world, but to learn to live in the world with an enlightened heart. As you listen to this story tonight, you may be asking yourself, in the moments when life touches me, do I open up or do I withdraw? Am I really at peace or am I just dodging? Have I turned spirituality into an open door or a wall to escape? Remember the words of the Buddha, better than 1,000 empty words. And the word, sometimes, is simply present. To be present with the lost person knocking at the door, with the fire that suddenly flares up, with one's own heart trembling with life. Because enlightenment does not make us less human. Enlightenment makes us more human than ever. Under the clear blue skies of the mountains of Tang Dynasty China, where towering peaks stood like spears piercing the clouds, and ancient temples clung to the mountainsides like falcons' nests, silently observing the world, Master Shu Shiqian established a new monastery. It is said that there, every early morning, the mist covers the courtyard, and in the afternoon the bell rings as if echoing from endless time. The news of his direct and uncompromising teaching style spread like a mountain wind, carrying with it the rumor that anyone who came here with a heart that truly hungered for truth could be swayed to the roots. Therefore, from remote provinces, where people rarely hear the sound of temple bells, seekers have crossed deep forests, crossed passes, endured cold and solitude to reach this remote land. On a cool autumn morning, when the golden leaves leave the branches and swirl like prayers sent into the air, when the high and wide sky arches carry a clarity only found in the mountains, a young monk appears in front of the monastery gates. His traveler's robe was covered with road dust. His straw sandals were worn out to the point where the skin of his feet could be seen. But in his wide-open eyes burned the fierce fire of the man who had left everything behind in search of the truth. Family, career, possessions, amenities that many people find difficult to give up. He spent years traveling from temple to temple, meditating in the deep forest, reading countless scriptures, listening to many teachings, but still felt like there was a transparent wall that he couldn't penetrate. He believed that in this faraway place, under the guidance of this famous teacher, he would finally touch the ultimate secret that had been hiding from him like a shadow for so long. When he entered the temple grounds, Master Shu was sweeping the leaves. His movements are slow and flexible, showing no signs of fatigue despite his advanced body. The beat of the broom followed the wind, as if he were sweeping not the yard, but the ignorance that was accumulating in the heart. The young monk knelt down deeply, his heart filled with the reverence of one who recognized a true teacher. When he raised his head, the words came out of his mouth almost uncontrollably. Master Bai, I have come a long way to study under your guidance. I have read sutras, meditated in many monasteries, studied with many teachers, but I still feel lost in the blur. I beseech you, please teach me the most essential truth. What is the most important principle of the Buddha's teachings? Master Shu stopped, leaning lightly on the broom handle, his eyes gentle but as deep as a night lake. Without the slightest hesitation in His Holiness's answer, the words dropped simply as if referring to the weather, not reached, not known. The young monk looked at him as if he must have heard it wrong. For a long time, there was only the sound of dry leaves rustling on the stone surface and the sound of the wind creeping through the ancient tile roof. When he realized that Master didn't say anything more, the confusion in him flared up into swirling questions. Master Bai, isn't that the whole teaching? We practice to achieve enlightenment. We learn to know the wisdom of the Buddha. I also came here to understand and know the ultimate truth. How can you say that the most important principle is not achieved? I don't know. Master Shu gently placed the broom on the ground, and all attention was focused on the confused student. His voice was calm, carrying the patience of the man who had led countless practitioners through this awkward twist. My son, he said slowly, what you really have can never be attained from the outside, and what you really need to understand cannot be grasped by wisdom. The mind that strives to attain enlightenment is the mind that obscures your original nature. The mind striving to know the ultimate truth becomes a barrier to the direct experience of that truth. The young monk frowned. Every word he said seemed to go against everything he believed about the path of practice. He has always tried, always strived, always looked forward to the future where he imagined that enlightenment awaited. But, he asked, if we can't attain or know anything, then why do we practice? Why are there monasteries, teachings, meditation? Master's eyes contained a hint of warmth as he replied, practice not to gain anything new, but to release what obscures you. Learning is not to accumulate knowledge, but to wear down concepts that prevent children from experiencing reality firsthand. Do you understand? The young monk was silent. A strange feeling spread through him, like the ground he had always believed to be solid, suddenly dissolved into clouds. He came here full of certainty. About the goal, about the path, about what needs to be achieved. Now, he finds himself faltering in a void where all assumptions are falling like autumn leaves. Master continued. The Buddha once said that there is no distinction between east and west in the sky. It's people who create the division themselves and believe it's real. He looked up at the vast sky, where the clouds drifted without a trace. It's the way you approach the practice that can become the biggest obstacle. A long time passed, and then Master continued, as if to open up before his eyes a paradox that the Zen master had tried to convey for generations. The seeking mind is inherently dualistic. When you seek the truth, you unwittingly create a separation between the seeker and the seeker. I put enlightenment in the future and stand in the present looking towards it, making the present insufficient. You seek peace without realizing that peace is the awareness in which the search arises. He walked slowly, picked up a leaf, and turned it in his hand. We meditate for peace, without knowing that peace is the foundation on which the thought of peace arises. We learn to be wise, not seeing that the ability to understand wisdom is already wise. We seek our true nature, but we don't see that the person we are looking for is the essence we are looking for. He then said, this does not mean that practice is useless. Practice is necessary, but not to achieve, but to release the layers of illusion that you put on yourself. The autumn wind blew through the temple grounds, and the young monk felt his heart beat slowly. He began to understand, not with reason, but with something softer and deeper. Master continued, many practitioners fall into what Zen calls spiritual materialism, viewing experience, knowledge, and states of consciousness as assets to be possessed. They measure progress by what they accumulate, not what they let go. He smiled slightly. Conceptual intelligence can become the most subtle prison. One can talk for hours about emptiness and still not get rid of thoughts. They memorize the doctrine of the present moment and still live in the constant stream of inner commentary. He looked directly at him. My daily mind is the way. The awareness that is reading these words in you at this very moment is not a stepping stone to enlightenment, but enlightenment, temporarily obscured by the thought that it must become something else. A gentle stillness pervades. It seemed that the whole mountains and forests were also listening. The Buddha said, Master exhaled softly, peace comes from within. Don't look for it outside. When you are looking for something more sacred than this moment, try to see if you can recognize that what you are looking for is already here. Can you practice not for attainment, but for liberation? Not to know, but to exist? The young monk felt his throat dry up. He felt as if he had entered an unknown door, where the distance between the seeker and the thing being sought suddenly disappeared. Master looked into his eyes. If you want to know your past, look at your current state. If you want to know the future, look at your child's actions in the moment. The path is not a journey to a distant destination, but a deeper realization of what has always been here. A gentle breeze shook the last leaves on the branches, and in that moment, the young monk felt as if he had just seen a bright gap among the thick clouds of years of search. He didn't achieve anything new, nor did he know anything new, but he felt lighter, wider, and for some reason, freer. Master Shu picked up the broom and continued to sweep the yard. The young monk stood silent, feeling each breath as if he was breathing for the first time. He understood that the answer he received was not to be understood with his head, but to be absorbed by his presence. Not achieved, unfamiliar. And in that very indulgence, the door that was always open suddenly appeared. He lowered his head deeply, feeling the mountain wind pass on the back of his neck like a wordless blessing. The path from here begins, not forward, but into the place he had forgotten, this very moment. Amidst the rolling hills of ancient Japan, where cherry blossoms fall like pink snow every season, and the sound of temple bells ringing and dissolving into the mountain wind, there is a quiet monastery, hidden like a dewy dream. There lives a woman named Chiono, a humble servant, doing countless little things that no one seems to notice, but that are necessary for every day that passes in the monastic community. While the nuns spent long hours meditating in incense-covered meditation halls and studying ancient classics, Chiono washed dishes, chopped wood, tended the simple garden, and brought water from a deep well to the barrel, one barrel at a time. Her low status made her almost invisible in the eyes of everyone. But it was also because of this that a strangely strong desire arose in her, the desire to understand the deep truths that the nuns used to discuss with such a natural and easy way that she admired her and painful. Every time there is a Buddhist lecture, Chiono tries to hold his breath, to listen through the thin wall separating the kitchen from the lecture hall, trying to pick up every drop and every piece of text, like a thirsty person who wants to find some water. But every time she timidly approached the teachers for guidance, they turned away, not with contempt, but with tenderness mixed with determination. I'm not ready for these profound teachings, they said, in a low but firm voice. My mind is not trained enough. My education is not enough to understand subtle concepts. Do your job well, and maybe in the next life, you will have the opportunity to practice. Those words fell on her heart like a cold stone. But instead of making her give up, they made her even more determined. If the official path is locked in front of her, she will open another path for herself. So after a long day at work, when the monastery fell into a peaceful sleep, and only the sound of the wind passing through the tiled roof remained, Chiono sat still in the kitchen or in the garden, trying to meditate as far as she could see it. She focused on her breathing, trying to empty her mind, trying to find the stillness that the nuns often spoke of in reverent voices. Day after day, year after year, Chiono's hair gradually turned gray. Wrinkles were deep around the corners of her eyes, and her hands were stiff from constant work. But instead of fading, the desire to find the truth in her grew brighter, like a lamp that burned brighter and clearer. At the same time, a quiet sadness crept into her heart, because so much time had passed that she still didn't feel any closer to what others seemed to be able to touch so easily. Suspicion, like the cold of winter, crept into the doorway, whispered to her that perhaps the teachers were right. Perhaps her mind was really not enough to understand the Tao. 30 years after the day she began trying to practice, on an autumn night when the bright full moon hung in the clear sky, Chiono took on the last task of the day: to fill a bucket of old wooden water in preparation for watering the small garden in the early morning. This bucket has followed her through many seasons of leaf fall. The bamboo strips tied around the body of the bucket have rotted, and its wood has worn out over the years. But with the care of the gardener's hands, it is still cohesive enough to hold water. She walked through the garden, the bucket swaying with each step. It was getting heavier and heavier in her hands, causing her to stop and rest. She put it down on the rock path, and when she casually tilted her head to look at the crystal clear water inside, she was stunned. There, floating on the still water like glass, is a round, shining, and perfect image of the moon. One moon in the bucket and one moon in the sky. Both are round, bright, and quiet. In that moment, Chiono finds herself holding her breath at the beauty that surpasses all words. Which moon is real? The question does not arise, because in that moment there is only seeing, a pure encounter between eyes, water, and light. There is no distinction. There is no reasoning. Only the moon, and the presence is looking at it. She lifted the bucket of water to continue walking, when a very small sound sounded, like a sigh of an old thing that had endured for too long. The rotten bamboo strips began to unravel. One bar breaks first, then another. Just one breath later, the bottom of the bucket fell, and the water spilled onto the dark ground, all in the blink of an eye. The water disappeared between the earth, and with it the moon in the bucket, disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Chiono stood silent, leaving only pieces of bamboo and broken wood in his hands. And then it happened. In that very moment, the moment when the moon disappeared from the water, when there was nothing left to hold, nothing to look for, something that 30 years of searching had not brought her bloomed. She no longer felt the separation between the seeker and what was being sought. There is no longer Chiono trying to grasp enlightenment. There is no moon left to grasp. There is no water left to store. There is only an absolute emptiness, but not the emptiness of want, but of completeness. An expansion without borders, a security that no one can give and no one can take away. She felt as if she had just woken up from a dream that lasted 3 decades. The words naturally flowed out of her mouth, like water flowing down the slope of the earth. With this and that, I try to keep the bucket intact and hope the moon doesn't leave it. But the bamboo strips have given way, and the water has flowed away. Now there is no moon in the water, no water, nothing. And in my hands, it is this emptiness, wholeness. Ancient masters once taught that when you realize nothing is missing, the whole world belongs to you. And it is in that brokenness, in that loss, in that emptiness, that the ultimate paradox unfolds. What we seek with spiritual effort can only appear when the search itself completely dissipates. Zen Buddhism speaks of clinging, the human tendency to treat even the highest truths as objects to be possessed, as if enlightenment were objects that can be held in the palm of one's hand. The old bucket that Chiono has kept for 30 years symbolizes that spiritual self, a fragile structure that we have worked hard to preserve, believing that it can contain enlightenment. For 30 years, she tried to keep it intact with all kinds of practice, technique, and effort, just as we use methods, teachings, and knowledge to hold on to a sense that we are progressing. But the truth only came out when the bucket collapsed completely. When the framework that contains all notions of achievement is gone, when what we believe is the basis for progress disintegrates, the boundless is revealed. The reflection of the moon in the water is a profound metaphor. The moon in the sky is our pristine nature, unchanging, not full, regardless of whether we see it or not. And the moon in the water is only a reflection. Like all our attempts to reach truth by concept, by experience, by state of mind, we always confuse that reflection with the truth, and so we always struggle to keep it in our bucket. Forget that the real moon is not dependent on water, nor is our true nature dependent on the grasp of wisdom. If we look back at ourselves, we will see how much energy has been spent to keep our spiritual bucket unbroken, protecting our spiritual identity, trying to maintain a sense of accomplishment, fear of losing the beautiful experiences, the quiet moments we once had. But what happens if we let go of the bucket? What if we let these things melt away naturally? When the bucket breaks, what is revealed is not deprivation, but pristine emptiness. Not a dark void, but an infinite space where all experiences can arise. When Chiono holds that emptiness in her hands, she holds it all. Suzuki Roshi says that in the beginner's mind, there are countless possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are very few. Chiono's enlightenment came not through the accumulation of experience, but by the complete failure of the expert mind, the breakdown of every structure she had built over the course of 3 decades. The bamboo strips that used to hold the bucket are the same as the practices. They're useful for a while, like the extra wheel on a child's bike, but eventually they have to give way for true freedom to emerge. The truth that Chiono realizes is not something new, but something that has always been there. The moon is still bright with or without reflections. Her true mind remains intact, whether she feels enlightened or blind. Only it was the search that covered her eyes for so many years. The Buddha once taught that an unguarded mind can harm us more than any enemy, but a properly illuminated mind can help us better than all our friends. And so, when she looked at the emptiness in her hands, she understood there was no need to become anything. There is no need to try to keep the moon in the water. There is no need to try to keep water in the bucket. No bucket required. No water is required. No moon is needed. Just let go and realize that your true nature has never lacked anything. The moon is still bright. It had always shone in the open sky, never locked in any bucket. In the distant, misty-covered mountains of an ancient land, where the bright clouds of dawn dribble across the majestic slopes and the sound of bronze bells flying in the wind like whispers from a distant realm, there is a monastery so famous for its rigor and stillness that it seems as if the time spent there is walked barefoot. The rough stone walls were covered with moss, the cobbled paths leading from the meditation hall to the cafeteria, from the vegetable garden to the retreat rooms, all merged into a separate world, as if separated from all the noise and desires of everyday life. There, the monks live by an almost absolute discipline. They keep an ancient vow of silence, away from words, to listen to the sound of their own minds. For them, each extra voice is a wind that stirs the surface of the calm lake. Silence is not just a rule, but a door that leads them to a deeper understanding. However, the monastery has a special tradition. Every 10 years, each monk is allowed to say exactly 2 words to the abbot. These 2 words, however brief, are seen as a rare opportunity to convey an essential problem, a practical concern, or an insight that has sprung up from 10 years of silent practice. It's like a very small crack in a solid wall, where sometimes a ray of light can get in. A young monk, when he first arrived at the monastery, was full of goodwill and sincerity. He longs to find peace, to become completely free from the afflictions of life. When he walked through the gates of the monastery, he believed that he had found the right way, the right teacher, and the right place. But from the first days, he struggled with dissatisfaction in his heart. The small room he stayed in was too empty, and the stiff bamboo bed made his back damp every night. A simple meal consisting of only thin porridge, boiled vegetables, and a little sesame salt made him always feel deprived. The schedule was rigorous, with long meditation sessions numbing his legs and heavy labor jobs tearing his body apart. Every day that passes, he finds a new annoyance. The first 10 years passed slowly, like drops of water falling from the roof tiles during the rainy season. Finally, the day he was allowed to talk about. He walked into the abbot's room. The old teacher, who had lived in the monastery for more than half his life, looked at him with gentle eyes, as if he could see through the ripples in his heart. When the young monk was allowed to say 2 words, he exclaimed, "Sleep hard." Only 2 words, but filled with complaints he had been pent up for so long. The abbot just nodded, didn't comment, didn't blame, didn't try to fix anything. "I understand," he said in a voice as soft as the wind. Then he motioned for him to return to his religious life. The monastery resumed the long days of silence, and the young monk returned to the same schedule. However, instead of calming down over the years, the dissatisfaction in his heart seemed to grow. He did not spend the next 10 years exploring the nature of the discomfort in the mind, but to sink deeper into it. In each meditation session, instead of observing his breathing, his mind revolves around things he doesn't like: frugal food, grueling labor, strict rules that he must follow. Every time he eats rice, he thinks, if only the food tasted better. Every time he wakes up, he thinks, if only the bed was softer. These thoughts were repeated like a reverse sutra that he read incessantly, unaware that he was making his mind more contained. Another 10 years passed. Again came the day of 2 words. The young monk, no longer young, knelt before the abbot. Once again, the old eyes still looked at him with unwavering patience. This time, the monk exclaimed, "The food stinks." The monk nodded again, not showing surprise or disappointment. "I understand," he said a second time, then let him go. But this time, the dissatisfaction in him was no longer just a small fire. It had become a smoldering fire, burning slowly but persistently, getting hotter every day. He began to see that everything was wrong. The weather was too cold, the work was too hard, the other monks were too slow or too quiet. He blamed the monastery, the discipline, and himself for choosing to enter this place. His heart was like a wooden barrel full of complaints that were never spoken, so it was fuller, heavier, and more rotten. The last 10 years of his 3 decades of cultivation passed, and when the third time he was spoken, there was no faith or hope left in his heart. He walked in front of the monk, this time no longer holding back, and said the last 2 words, "I quit." His voice sounded full of fatigue and bitterness. The abbot looked at him for a long time, so long that it seemed as if he were talking to the very root of the pain in the man in front of him. Then he gently replied, "I understand why. For the past 30 years, everything I have done, just complaining." That simple sentence is not a reproach, but a truth that is put down as gently as a falling leaf. But the truth was so heavy that the monk was stunned. For many years, he believed that he suffered because the monastery was too harsh, because the living conditions were too poor. But never once did he look at himself. He never realized that people who lived in the same place, ate the same food, slept in the same bed, found peace. And he didn't. The difference is not in the situation, but in his mind for that situation. He left the monastery carrying 30 years of discontent with him, and perhaps for the rest of his life, he would tell that the monastery was too poor, too harsh, too silent. But the abbot knew that he was not leaving because of the hard bed or the simple food. He left because he had cultivated a mental habit, the habit of looking at the lack instead of the adequate, looking at the difficult instead of the beautiful, looking at the discomfort instead of the peaceful void that always exists behind the discomfort. In the meditation sessions that followed, other monks sometimes recalled their old fellow disciple, not to judge, but to remind each other of a lesson that everyone could forget. The mind can turn heaven into hell, and it can also turn the ordinary into peace. A monk later said that he learned from his friend a lesson that was more profound than any sermon. The path to liberation lay not in changing circumstances, but in transforming one's own habits of mind. And in that monastery, though the wind was still blowing, the beds were hard, the food was simple, the silence continued to nurture hundreds of hearts that looked inward, where contentment was not created by the situation, but by the very look we brought to the situation. There, each person has 2 words to say every 10 years. But what matters is not what they say, but how silent they are. The man walked in the middle of the jungle in the afternoon. Each step was heavy, as if every time he lifted it, he had to carry the worries weighing on his thin shoulders. Sunlight penetrates the thick foliage, pouring down the forest floor into countless faint streaks of light, as soft as silk strips tied into the air. But he didn't see anything in those things. His mind was drowning in a messy sea of unpaid debt, a dying job, a relationship falling apart, and dreams he once held so tightly but now slipped out of his hands. The forest is peaceful, and his heart is stirring. He had been gone for so long that he could no longer feel his own feet. The cold, humid air of the forest made his breathing heavy, but he continued to walk like an old habit, always trying, always worried, always straining himself in invisible battles. Then finally, he stopped next to a large tree. The grayish-brown bark trunk looked as normal as every tree around it, but to the tired man, it seemed something generous, like a temporary support for the crumbling part of his life. He leaned back against the trunk of the tree, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. As he tried to catch his breath, he realized that he was as dry as the desert. A fleeting thought was like a sigh. I wish I had something to drink. He only said to himself, so small that it seemed as if the wind would sweep him away. But at that moment, something cool touched his hand. When he opened his eyes, he saw a glass of clear water, full and emitting a faint, cool air. He looked at it with his familiar, suspicious eyes, the same way he always looked at the opportunities in his life. Really? Are there any traps? He tilted the cup, looked it in front of the light, and touched his lips to try it. It was the coolest sip of fresh water he had ever drunk, as if it had been poured from the deepest well in the mountain. But instead of rejoicing, he frowned, not believing what had just happened. At that moment, his stomach roared, reminding him of the hunger he had tried to ignore. He opened his mouth, hoping to get something to eat. And, as an echo of that thought, a plate of food appeared in front of him. The bread is sweet, the fruits are juicy, and the vegetables are fresh as if they have just been picked in the early sun. He ate every bite in confused surprise. In his heart, he was both happy and afraid, like a child who had been given a gift so big that he couldn't feel like he could belong. When he realized that his wish was coming true, his heart beat faster, and excitement began to rise. He looked through the gap between the trees and quietly said that he wished he had a beautiful home where he could finally stop, where he could feel at peace and belong. Immediately, at the edge of the forest, a magnificent house appeared. The windows were wide open, and a gentle breeze shook the thin curtains. Inside is cozy furniture, arranged as if the owner has just left for a walk in the garden. The flowers emitted a gentle fragrance, as if congratulating him. The man stood silently at the scene. He had dreamed of a home all his life, but never thought he deserved such a beautiful place. As he approached, he told himself that if there was such a house, he would need a maid to maintain it. The thought had just appeared, and the servants appeared, with a gentle and respectful attitude, as if they had been waiting for him for a long time. His joy was even more overwhelming. Then in a moment, he exclaimed that a house is only really home when someone shares it. He wished there was an intelligent, kind, loving woman, someone who could look at him with listening eyes. Immediately, a woman appeared beside him, her bright eyes filled with warmth that made his heart soften. When she laid her hand on his, he felt a strange peace, a belief that happiness could really touch him. But then everything changed. A familiar, weak voice that had been in his mind since childhood suddenly rang out. Impossible. You don't deserve it. You're just a loser. These things are not for you. He took a step back, looked at the woman who was smiling softly, and then at the house, the servants, all the good things that had just come. He shook his head in confusion and said out loud, "No, it's impossible. This is a joke. I can't get these things." As if those words were a reverse spell, it all began to dissipate. The woman's smile faded and disappeared. The servants turned away and dissolved into the air. The house loses its color, then fades like dew melting in the sun. Eventually, both the dish and the glass of water disappeared from his hands. And he stood there again, leaning against the original tree, leaving only the old reality with its worries as if no miracle had ever passed by. He sighed for a long time, almost accepting. I know, I'm not worthy. Not everything good is for me. Then he turned his back and walked on through the forest, making the same mistake as when he arrived. His mind was quickly engulfed again by familiar worries. Those fleeting good things only made him sadder because he believed that he could never keep them. Meanwhile, the tree stood silently behind him, calm as if it had never made a wish. The wind swayed through the foliage as a gentle reminder that it was his faith that had created the miracle, and that it was his doubt that erased it. The forest is still the same, only his mind has changed. In fact, he was standing under a wishing tree where every thought and belief could come true. But when you believe in deprivation, deprivation will come. When you believe in unhappiness, unhappiness will return. And when he doesn't believe he deserves happiness, happiness also leaves him. In the silence of the forest, there is something like the whisper of ancient wisdom. We are what we think. The world we live in is made up of our deepest beliefs. That man may have had it all, but he has a habit of believing in his own limits rather than his own abilities. And that habit is stronger than a miracle. Many of us live the same way. A good opportunity comes, I doubt. A person who treats sincerely, I am vigilant. A beautiful thing appears. We tell ourselves that it will disappear. We leave our own wishing tree because we are afraid of believing, afraid of receiving, afraid of being deprived of something good that we have not yet been accustomed to. But the truth is as tender as light passing through a tree. Only when we open our hearts can we see what is already there. The richness of life does not disappear when we take it. It only expands further. And in each of us, there is still an invisible tree somewhere, quietly waiting for us to believe in ourselves, just once long enough for the miracle to bloom. In an ancient monastery, hidden in the remote mountains of ancient China, there is a young monk known for his seriousness and dedication to the point of almost extreme seriousness in his practice. His day begins before dawn creeps over the mountain peaks. In the cold night, when all living beings were still sleeping, he sat in meditation motionless on the pedestal, his back straight as a pine trunk, his breathing as steady as the rhythm of space. In the midst of this stillness, he devoted all his energy to observing every movement in his mind, seeing it as the only path to enlightenment. As the sun began to shine on the moss-covered tile roof of the monastery, he completed the long meditation session and entered the sutra class. With almost ceremonial seriousness, he opened the ancient scrolls, his eyes scanning each line with the precision of a scribe, not letting any words be overlooked, nor allowing himself to receive ambiguity or ambiguity. He reads, notes, compares, contrasts, and memorizes each paragraph as if each word contains a treasure that just a little absent-mindedness will slip out of his hands. His fellow students often called him a man of steel because no one saw him smile, nor did anyone see him let his mind loose even for a moment. To them, his devotion was both admirable and a little apprehensive, as if his every breath was more serious than necessary. One clear autumn morning, as the maple leaves outside the monastery grounds began to turn crimson, the young monk was studying a difficult passage in the sutra about the nature of emptiness. The passage seemed clear, but every time he thought he understood, the meaning dissipated like the dew of the first day. It contradicted everything he had ever learned, making him feel like he was trying to capture his own shadow. The ink pen stopped, and his eyebrows furrowed deeply. After some deliberation, he carefully marked the pages of the sutra and decided to go to his teacher, who was considered as deep as the ancient well of winter. When he entered the room, the old teacher was sitting quietly, the light through the paper window shining dark light on his face like an ancient painting. The young monk bowed deeply, paid homage, and then presented the confusing passage and interpretations he had tried. He explained slowly, clearly, with a voice that contained a seriousness that was almost tense. The teacher listened attentively, his calm face showing no judgment. When the young monk finished his anticipated presentation, what he received was not a profound explanation, but a laugh. At first, it was just a smile. Then it became a giggle, and finally it broke into a childish laugh. The teacher's whole body trembled with laughter. His eyes filled with tears of joy. That laughter echoed in the small room, spreading like the wind blowing across the surface of the lake. The young monk stood still like a wooden statue, his face flushed with confusion and confusion. He did not know what that laughter meant. Humor, contempt, or love? The teacher didn't say a word of explanation, just continued to laugh, and finally got up and left the room, leaving the young disciple alone in the stifling silence. The next 3 days with the young monk passed like a long stretch of mental torture. Not because the laughter was loud or intense, but because he didn't understand it. He was used to explaining everything, analyzing every idea, always looking for ways to rationalize each phenomenon. But that laughter was too free, too unconformed for him to lock it in his sphere of understanding. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. His meditation became disordered. His mind kept revolving around a question. Why did you laugh at that time? Did he ask something so stupid? How many years of serious practice do you just find me funny? The more he thought about it, the more his heart hurt, and the deeper he was pulled into the abyss of doubt. Finally, unable to bear it anymore, he went to the teacher's room in a heavy mood. But unlike the previous time, this time he did not bring the sutras, nor did he bring the confidence of his daily knowledge. He sat down, bowed his head, and said in a rare, honest way, how miserable he had been for the past 3 days. He talked about his confusion, his humiliation, his insecurity, his fear that he had failed in his studies. When he asked why he was laughing when he was expecting the most serious instruction, his voice trembled like someone who was about to lose his way. The teacher looked at him for a long time. His eyes were gentle, as if he wanted to embrace the pain that the disciple was containing. Then he invited him to sit down next to me. In a calm voice, he asked, "Do you know what your problem is? You're worse than a clown." The words were light, but had a strong impact like thunder in the young monk's head. He was stunned, a feeling of shame overflowing his face. He reacted according to his old habits, reasoning, defending himself, explaining his practice. But he shook his head, smiling generously. He said that a clown only felt happy when he made others laugh, and that the young monk only felt pain when others laughed, even though the laughter was not directed at him. "So," he asked, "aren't you worse than a clown? I'm so attached that I can't stand the freedom of others." The teacher's words fell like a drop of water into a lake, creating ripples that spread in the monk's mind. He suddenly saw very clearly that his ego was operating. He found himself so attached to the image of a serious cultivator that everything that did not fit that image distressed him. His laughter was not directed at him. It only comes from the joy of seeing a young person trapped in the midst of concepts that the Dharma itself teaches him to let go. He laughs at the beautiful paradox of the path. The more we grasp it, the more we lose what we seek. This realization came to him not by reason, but by the softening of both mind and body. He began to laugh. At first, it was very small, like the sound of leaves stirring slightly, then gradually became a real laugh, clearer than any sound he had ever made in his life. He laughs at himself, the excessive seriousness, the attachment, the insidious pride, the effort to the point of creating suffering. And when his laughter blended into the memory of his laughter 3 days ago, a new understanding bloomed in his heart, as gently as a lotus opening its wings in the morning. From that moment, he realized that wisdom did not only come from books, not only from theory or commentary. It can come from laughter, from surprises, from the absurdity of life, from moments that we are not prepared for. He looked back at himself and saw how many times he had tried to bind his intellect to the framework, trying to understand the Dharma with seriousness, while the Dharma was as free as the wind and soft as water. The young monk's story reminds us that sometimes the suffering we create is not because life is too complicated, but because we are too attached to the idea of ourselves. When others laugh, we think they are laughing at us. When something doesn't match expectations, we see it as an insult. When the doctrine comes in an unfamiliar form, we reject it. In this rejection, we close the door to understanding. The young monk learned that wisdom does not require strain, does not need to be strained. It comes when we let go of things that don't belong to us. Our image, our expectations, our narcissism, our need to be recognized as knowledgeable. His teacher did not explain because he knew that one more explanation would not break down the wall of ego. Only laughter is strong enough to shatter it. Finally, the young monk bowed his head and thanked him, but this time not with heavy solemnity, but with gratitude as light as breath. He learned the most important lesson, that enlightenment is not the process of becoming more serious, but about becoming freer. And from that day, when laughter rang out anywhere in the monastery, he no longer felt threatened. He knew it could be a wake-up call. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, perhaps the most important thing is to understand that life's pain and difficulties do not always come from what we experience externally, but are often the result of how we perceive them. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there was an old master renowned for his patience and wisdom, whose students knew that each teaching contained a world within it, a power to transform the mind if properly listened to and practiced. One of his young students often came to his heavy mind with complaints about everything from the aches and pains of his body while sitting in meditation, to small noises that interrupted concentration, to discomfort in everyday life. And his voice often carried weight, as if all of this combined had turned into an unbearable burden. The teacher, listening with infinite patience, realizes that words alone cannot change the way students perceive. So one cool morning, as the golden sunlight crept through the paper windows of the modest house, he made an unusual request without explanation, only a guide. "My dear pupil, I need you to come into the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a small amount is enough." The student, confused but obedient, returned with his palm full of coarse white crystals, and the teacher took a small glass of water, motioning for him to put all the salt in it and drink it. The student hesitated, suspecting that too much salt for such a small amount of water would be unbearable. But the teacher just said, "Trust the process. Drink it." When the crystals dissolved in the water, he took a sip and immediately winced at the intense bitterness that filled his mouth. Saliva gushed out, and the teacher smiled softly. "Wonderful. Now, take that same handful of salt and go with me." They walked in silence to the shore of a pristine mountain lake, where the water stretched out like a mirror that reflected the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to distinguish between earth and sky. The teacher said, "Now, put this handful of salt in the lake." The student waded into the shallow water and opened his hand, observing the crystals scattered on the surface of the lake, quickly disappearing without leaving a trace. "Drink water from the lake," the teacher instructed, and as he held the water to his lips, the refreshing sensation of the pure water filled his mouth, sweet, cool, not bitter. The teacher asked, "Do you taste salt?" The student slowly replied, "No, I didn't taste any salt." The teacher placed his weathered hand on the disciple's hand. His eyes were gentle and deep. "The suffering of life is pure salt. No more, no less. The level of pain that exists remains constant, but the level of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container into which we place that pain. When you're in pain, the only thing you really control is your reaction. You can choose to be a little glass where each grain of salt overwhelms your senses, or expand your consciousness like a vast lake where challenges dissolve into harmlessness." He paused and insisted, "Don't make glasses anymore, my friend. Become a lake." However, it is not enough to understand the theory alone. There are times when pain and misunderstandings do not come from the outside, but from our own minds, as in the story of the famous monk who strictly adhered to Buddhist precepts, exemplary meditation, committed to absolute nonviolence, who found comfort in the structure and certainty of the rules. One moonless night, after the evening meditation, the monk slowly walked along the garden path to his lodging. Complete darkness, only the faint contours of familiar landmarks. Suddenly, his feet fell on a soft object and gave in, making a muffled sound like a bell piercing the silence. The monk froze, his heart pounding, thinking to himself that he had stepped on a frog that laid eggs, violated the first precept, took the life of a creature, even dozens of lives. Horror overwhelmed Waves, hands trembling, kneeling, trying to determine what had happened, but the night was too dark to realize. His mind whirled with blame and self-doubt, unable to sleep, dreams of being taken over by hundreds of frogs with accusatory eyes. The peace he had cultivated for years was gone, replaced by increasing torment, not only with the present moment, but with his entire spiritual practice. When the dawn appeared, shining a soft golden light on the garden, the monk walked out into the familiar street, his heart heavy, but when the morning light revealed, there was no trace of the frog, just an overripe eggplant falling from the garden, and the muffling sound of last night was made by itself. In the moment of realizing the truth, something extraordinary happened. He felt a profound change in perception, far beyond relief. The whole night of suffering was created not by external reality, but by his mind's interpretation of a vague experience. He realized that the practice of Zen was not just about strictly following the rules or avoiding all mistakes, but about seeing clearly without being distorted by assumptions and mental pressure. Reality is largely created by mental interpretation, and suffering largely comes from how we react to what we think happens, rather than from what actually happens. The muffled sound of eggplant becomes a metaphor for how our minds turn vague events into nightmares. From anger, judgment, comparison, to excessive worry about uncertain situations. The monk realized that how much daily stress stemmed from imaginary situations, and that reacting to this mental habit only creates unnecessary suffering. This awareness opens the door to liberation, where the intellect is no longer bound by assumptions, but can see things clearly with compassion and peace. Two stories, Salt and Lake, Eggplant in the Dark, teach us about the nature of perception and psychological reactions. In the salt story, pain is present as an objective entity, but whether bitterness or gentleness depends entirely on the container, symbolizing how we expand or shrink the mind. In the eggplant story, pain emerges entirely from the mind's interpretation, from the imposition of meaning, anxiety, unnecessary fear, a reminder that psychological reality can create artificial suffering. Both stories point to one thing in common. We have power with our perceptions. We can choose to become a large lake for the pain to dissolve, or to keep it closed in a small glass so that the pain becomes bitter. We can look at the event objectively with an open mind, without rushing to impose meaning, or being bound by assumptions and specializations in order to avoid creating unnecessary suffering. Zen Buddhism reminds us that true wisdom is not just knowing, but direct awareness and experience. That excessive seriousness, clinging to self-image or outcome, or imaginary fear, all create barriers to enlightenment. We learn to expand our awareness, listen to our bodies, observe our minds, and understand that every emotion, every pain, every difficulty is part of a larger experience. When pain appears, become a lake. Expand your consciousness so that the salts of life dissolve into the whole without suffering yourself. When a vague event occurs, like an eggplant, recognize the reaction of the mind that creates the story, and learn to laugh, learn to perceive the truth as it is, without adding or subtracting, without exaggeration, without compression. The journey through salt and lakes, through eggplants in the dark, is a reminder that meditation is not a strict sequence of actions, but awareness, expansion, tenderness with oneself, and the wisdom not to be overwhelmed by pain and illusion. We can turn life into a lake where every challenge dissolves, or into a small glass where every grain of salt becomes bitter. We can allow the mind to add to the story, or look directly at reality as it is, with joy, lightness, and clarity. Every day, every moment, we are faced with the opportunity to transform pain into understanding, doubt into wisdom, and anxiety into joy. And from the simplest of experiences, like taking a sip of water or stepping on an eggplant, we can learn to let go, expand, and understand that we are what we think we are, that everything we are arises from our awareness, and with that awareness, we create the world, integrate into life with serenity, with gratitude, and with an open heart to all the challenges and miracles that happen around us. Tonight, as you face the inevitable ambiguity of human interactions, you may remember the monk and the eggplant in the dark, when the long night of anxiety, fear, and imagination was created by the mind without any objective entity. When your mind begins to build stories around ambiguous situations, you can step back and ask yourself, what do I really know for sure? And what am I adding through my own interpretation? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything. Find your own light. The monk's awakening does not come from following the external rules perfectly, but from discovering the clarity that always exists within himself, always ready, but obscured by the overinterpretation of the mind. The next story we'll tell reveals the difference between technical mastery and true self-mastery, between achievement-based confidence and confidence that comes from within. And this is The Archer and the Bridge's lesson about autonomy and presence. A young man has spent years perfecting his archery skills. Day in and day out, he trains under all weather conditions, whether it's hot sun or torrential rain, strong winds or dense fog. His dedication is absolute. His focus is unwavering. His technique turned out to be perfect, aiming so accurately that he rarely missed, even at long distances. News of his extraordinary abilities spread throughout the region, and he began to win a series of archery competitions, each of which fostered a growing sense of pride and confidence. Flushed with success, perhaps a little drunk with his reputation, the young archer decides to seek the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories about an old Zen master living in the high mountains, who was famous not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary archery skills. And in his heart came the determination, I will challenge this master, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in the land. When the young man finds the teacher's simple home, he challenges the confidence of youth, lacking humility. Old man, I have heard about your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to prove whether your skills can match mine. The teacher, whose ancient eyes sparkled with silent joy, only nodded in acceptance without a word of judgment. The young archer immediately prepares, selects the target at a considerable distance, draws the bow with the precision he has practiced for years, and drops the arrow flying straight into the center of the target with a satisfying thud. Without stopping, he fired the second arrow, and miraculously, it hit the first arrow accurately, a feat of engineering that few people have done. He turned to the teacher with a satisfied look, his chest heaving with pride, and said, "Well, let's see if you can match." The teacher looked at the target, looked at the young man, smiled gently, and instead of withdrawing his bow, he motioned for him to follow him. "Come here, let's find a more suitable place for the performance." Curious about the old master's thoughts, and confident that no place could diminish his ability to excel, the young man followed him up a winding mountain road. They climbed higher, the air thinned, the path became more dangerous step by step, until they came to a mountain divided by the abyss. A narrow, weathered log serves as a bridge between the two shores, and beneath the foot, the dark abyss, so far away that the bottom seems to disappear into nothingness. A small mistake will mean certain death. Without a word, the old master walked up the precarious bridge, flexible, gentle, despite the danger. When he reached the middle of the log, where it sagged slightly and shook with his body weight, he stopped and turned towards a distant tree. Drawing his bow naturally, he aimed and released the arrow. It flew through the void, hitting trees in the distance, not for absolute accuracy, but because it was done from a state of internal equilibrium, unshaked by fear, not dependent on external conditions. Then the old master walked back to the solid ground, signaling to the young man, "Now it's your turn." The young archer approached the edge of the abyss, looking down at the endless abyss, his mouth dry, his palms sweaty, and his legs trembling. The thought of stepping onto the narrow bridge overwhelmed the paralyzing horror. The technical skill that gave him confidence in controlled conditions seemed useless in the face of this primordial fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body disobeyed, his hands trembling so much that he couldn't hold the bow properly, he couldn't aim accurately. The master observed with understanding and compassion. You have developed great skill with the bow, but you have very little skill with the mind to relax the shot. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you will become. This ancient wisdom sheds light on the difference between technical mastery and mastery of the mind that uses technique. We often confuse technical proficiency with true proficiency, focusing on external achievement while ignoring the internal development that makes those achievements meaningful. We perfect our skills in a controlled environment, but discover limitations in the face of uncertainty, danger, or real challenges. The young archer has achieved extraordinary skill under ideal conditions, but when the environment changes, when the fear of intrusion, when the stakes become a reality, his perfect confidence dissipates. True mastery is revealed to be dependent on the interior, not on the external environment. When examining your own abilities, ask yourself, how much pressure do you have? When faced with unfamiliar conditions, emotional challenges, or dangerous situations, do your skills remain stable or fail? In the practice of Zen, we cultivate an unshakable presence, the ability to concentrate and be effective despite external conditions. This does not mean eliminating fear or challenge, but rather developing the inner stability to act skillfully even when fearful or uncertain. The master's performance is not to show superior archery skills, but to reveal the difference between a skill that depends on ideal circumstances and a skill that arises from inner mastery. His arrow need not be more precise than the boy's arrow, but only need to be freed from a place of true calm, unshakable presence. Zen masters teach that the unborn Buddha's mind can handle any situation, exhibiting constant cognitive qualities, regardless of the environment or risk. This is the difference between confidence from controlling conditions and confidence from being able to react wisely to whatever happens. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace." An arrow fired from real presence is worth more than 1,000 arrows from the ego under controlled conditions. True mastery is not measured by the perfect environment, but by the ability to stay centered when everything around is uncertain. When looking deeply into your own relationship with challenge and fear, ask yourself, in life, when are you good in a safe environment, but have difficulty when challenges arise, when the stakes rise, when conditions become unpredictable? This is not a failure, but information for where practice needs to be deepened, where inner stability is needed. Tonight, as you consider skills and developmental abilities, distinguish between those that depend on ideal conditions and those that remain strong under pressure. Feel the difference between confidence from avoiding challenges and confidence from facing challenges with unwavering presence. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that chaos is inherent in all things complex and forces us to find balance not in solid foundations, but in our ability to stay centered as we walk over the bridge over the abyss of life. The next story we share shows the profound difference between divine practice and true understanding, between pure knowledge and living wisdom, and is the teaching of the abbot that many will find both frightening and mysterious. In the Grand Chao Monastery, where hundreds of monks gather every day to meditate and study, the morning rhythm still follows ancient traditions. As the first light of dawn hit the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, the monks began to disperse, each performing their own tasks, from gardening, cooking, copying sacred texts, to maintaining the monastery buildings. One particular morning, Venerable Chao Cho, the abbot of Chao Cho, walked according to the custom that has become his essence after decades of practice, checking on the health of his disciples and the status of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating, simple and full of inner authority, so that no one dared to judge him by appearance or ordinary words. The monks, though accustomed to his presence, never knew when a simple word could become profound teaching, or when profound spiritual understanding could be revealed in the form of a common idea. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, where the community gathers twice daily to sit in silence, the abbot notices a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden building. The monk appears to be engaged in some form of practice, although he does not engage in scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chow called softly, approaching, his every step so gentle and mindful that it seemed to make no sound. "Where have all the virtuous people gone?" The question may seem simple, almost like a normal conversation, but for those who are familiar with Chao Cho's teaching, they realize the subtle depth in each word, that it is not only a superficial answer to the physical location, but also involves inner awareness and understanding of spiritual practice. The young monk looked up with confidence, having been in the monastery for several years, and pride himself on grasping the essentials of Zen teachings. This seemed to be an opportunity to prove his understanding of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied seriously, pointing to other areas of the monastery where the brothers were engaged in their daily work. His tone suggests that the answer is obvious, that the moral person is naturally engaged in productive activity rather than sitting still, that spiritual practice must be expressed through useful and effective action. However, what happened next left the young monk completely stunned. Without warning, Chow reached into the fold of his robe and pulled out a sharp knife, the blade of which gleamed in the morning sun. But what was worrisome was not the threat, but the next action. With absolute composure, the abbot stretched out his neck, let his throat come into contact with the blade, and put the knife in the young monk's hand. His voice remained soft, easy to hear, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as the abbot are many and demanding. I wonder if you can please decapitate me? It will help with my task management." The young monk's eyes widened in horror, and his hands trembled as he stared at the knife and neck of the venerable teacher. Everything in this situation contradicted what he understood about proper monastic behavior, spiritual teachings, and basic human decency. Unable to understand what was really being asked, unable to see the deep meaning behind this seemingly crazy invitation, the frightened monk dropped the knife and fled, his feet leading him out of the meditation room, far from the incomprehensible spectacle, his mind whirling with fear and confusion. Chao calmly picked up the knife, put it back in his robe, and continued his morning walk with a peaceful attitude, as if nothing had happened. This story teaches about the profound difference between pure wisdom and true awareness. Why do we often confuse conceptual knowledge with true wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind likes to gather spiritual ideas, organize them into neat categories, and create the illusion of understanding without directly experiencing the transformation of insight. The young monk's answer, "They all went to work," represented a dualistic type of thinking, separating spiritual practice from ordinary activities. His answer implies that virtue lies in performing tasks efficiently rather than sitting still. that awakening can only occur in seemingly useful activity. But Chaos' teaching goes far beyond superficial interpretation. By the act of putting his neck on the blade, he is asking a profound question. If the monk truly understands that all virtuous people go to work, what work is really essential? When responsibility matters, what is the most compassionate response to the pain of others? Take a deep look at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide our lives into sacred and mundane activities, important and mundane work, sacred moments, and ordinary times? This dualistic thinking makes us unaware that every moment presents an opportunity for an awakening response. The abbot's gesture points to the heart of Zen understanding, that sincere compassion sometimes requires action beyond ordinary thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting out the most precious thing, our concepts, our roles, even our sense of distinct self. Zen master Lingji once taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha," a famous quote that points to the same radical teachings that Chao imparted. Any fixed idea of enlightenment, any attachment to a spiritual role or concept, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes entails destroying the very thing we think we are protecting. The young monk's horror and flight show that he completely misses this level of profound teaching, still trapped in the literal understanding. Unable to look past the surface of the abbot's words, his spiritual understanding, although clear, is still only conceptual knowledge, not yet a living wisdom. When faced with the opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. Consider our relationship with sacred responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help in their pain, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a place of deeper understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual position to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom sheds light on the difference between talking about virtue and expressing it. The monk can determine where the virtuous person goes and what he does, but when faced with the opportunity to practice radical compassion, he runs away. His knowledge remains separate from the spontaneous act of awakening. In our Zen practice, we cultivate so-called great doubt, a willingness to question even the most cherished spiritual insights. This skepticism is not skepticism, but an openness to discoveries that transcend the current conceptual framework. Are we willing to let spiritual certainties be challenged, even destroyed, if they serve awakening? When faced with the opportunity to help others carry their burdens, can we distinguish between providing what we think they need and responding from sincere understanding? It can be felt that true compassion sometimes entails transcending the comfortable assumption of correct spiritual behavior. The Buddha taught, to care for others is to take care of yourself. Taking care of yourself is caring for others. The offer of the abbot, sacrificing his own head towards this non-dualistic understanding, where the boundary between self and others, between the helper and the helped, dissolves into a spontaneous act of compassion. Every moment in life is an opportunity to practice wisdom and compassion, regardless of external names or rituals. What is important is not conceptual understanding, but vivid wisdom, the ability to react compassionately, the ability to let go of all attachments in order to see the true nature of reality clearly. In that morning, as the morning light touched the peaks and the monastery awoke, an important lesson of compassion, wisdom and insight was taught, not through the sermon, but through the direct action of the abbot. The lesson is not in doing the work or observing the ritual, but in the ability to see the truth beyond the forms, to be willing to act out of radical compassion, even if it challenges every belief, every understanding, every knowledge we have ever held. And when all that is precious seems to have to be sacrificed, that's when true wisdom is revealed. The next story we share shows the profound difference between divine practice and true understanding, between pure knowledge and living wisdom, and is the teaching of the abbot that many will find both frightening and mysterious. In the Grand Chao Monastery, where hundreds of monks gather every day to meditate and study, the morning rhythm still follows ancient traditions. As the first light of dawn hit the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, the monks began to disperse, each performing their own tasks, from gardening, cooking, copying sacred texts, to maintaining the monastery buildings. One particular morning, Venerable Chao Cho, the abbot of Chao Cho, walked according to the custom that has become his essence after decades of practice, checking on the health of his disciples and the status of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating, simple and full of inner authority, so that no one dared to judge him by appearance or ordinary words. The monks, though accustomed to his presence, never knew when a simple word could become profound teaching, or when profound spiritual understanding could be revealed in the form of a common idea. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, where the community gathers twice daily to sit in silence, the abbot notices a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden building. The monk appears to be engaged in some form of practice, although he does not engage in scheduled community activities. "Brother," Cao called softly, approaching, his every step so gentle and mindful that it seemed to make no sound. "Where have all the virtuous people gone?" The question may seem simple, almost like a normal conversation, but for those who are familiar with Chao Cho's teaching, they realize the subtle depth in each word, that it is not only a superficial answer to the physical location, but also involves inner awareness and understanding of spiritual practice. The young monk looked up with confidence, having been in the monastery for several years, and pride himself on grasping the essentials of Zen teachings. This seemed to be an opportunity to prove his understanding of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied seriously, pointing to other areas of the monastery where the brothers were engaged in their daily work. His tone suggests that the answer is obvious, that the moral person is naturally engaged in productive activity rather than sitting still, that spiritual practice must be expressed through useful and effective action. However, what happened next left the young monk completely stunned. Without warning, Cao reached into the fold of his robe and pulled out a sharp knife, the blade of which gleamed in the morning sun. But what was worrisome was not the threat, but the next action. With absolute composure, the abbot stretched out his neck, let his throat come into contact with the blade, and put the knife in the young monk's hand. His voice remained soft, easy to hear, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as the abbot are many and demanding. I wonder if you can please decapitate me? It will help with my task management." The young monk's eyes widened in horror, and his hands trembled as he stared at the knife and neck of the venerable teacher. Everything in this situation contradicted what he understood about proper monastic behavior, spiritual teachings, and basic human decency. Unable to understand what was really being asked, unable to see the deep meaning behind this seemingly crazy invitation, the frightened monk dropped the knife and fled, his feet leading him out of the meditation room, far from the incomprehensible spectacle, his mind whirling with fear and confusion. Chao calmly picked up the knife, put it back in his robe, and continued his morning walk with a peaceful attitude, as if nothing had happened. This story teaches about the profound difference between pure wisdom and true awareness. Why do we often confuse conceptual knowledge with true wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind likes to gather spiritual ideas, organize them into neat categories, and create the illusion of understanding without directly experiencing the transformation of insight. The young monk's answer, "They all went to work," represented a dualistic type of thinking, separating spiritual practice from ordinary activities. His answer implies that virtue lies in performing tasks efficiently rather than sitting still. That awakening can only occur in seemingly useful activity. But Chao's teaching goes far beyond superficial interpretation. By the act of putting his neck on the blade, he is asking a profound question. If the monk truly understands that all virtuous people go to work, what work is really essential? When responsibility matters, what is the most compassionate response to the pain of others? Take a deep look at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide our lives into sacred and mundane activities, important and mundane work, sacred moments, and ordinary times? This dualistic thinking makes us unaware that every moment presents an opportunity for an awakening response. The abbot's gesture points to the heart of Zen understanding, that sincere compassion sometimes requires action beyond ordinary thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting out the most precious thing, our concepts, our roles, even our sense of distinct self. Zen master Linji once taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." A famous quote that points to the same radical teachings that Chao imparted. Any fixed idea of enlightenment, any attachment to a spiritual role or concept, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes entails destroying the very thing we think we are protecting. The young monk's horror and flight show that he completely misses this level of profound teaching, still trapped in the literal understanding. Unable to look past the surface of the abbot's words, his spiritual understanding, although clear, is still only conceptual knowledge, not yet a living wisdom. When faced with the opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. Consider our relationship with sacred responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help in their pain, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a place of deeper understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual position to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom sheds light on the difference between talking about virtue and expressing it. The monk can determine where the virtuous person goes and what he does, but when faced with the opportunity to practice radical compassion, he runs away. His knowledge remains separate from the spontaneous act of awakening. In our Zen practice, we cultivate so-called great doubt, a willingness to question even the most cherished spiritual insights. This skepticism is not skepticism, but an openness to discoveries that transcend the current conceptual framework. Are we willing to let spiritual certainties be challenged, even destroyed, if they serve awakening? When faced with the opportunity to help others carry their burdens, can we distinguish between providing what we think they need and responding from sincere understanding? It can be felt that true compassion sometimes entails transcending the comfortable assumption of correct spiritual behavior. The Buddha taught, to care for others is to take care of yourself. Taking care of yourself is caring for others. The offer of the abbot, sacrificing his own head towards this non-dualistic understanding, where the boundary between self and others, between the helper and the helped, dissolves into a spontaneous act of compassion. Every moment in life is an opportunity to practice wisdom and compassion, regardless of external names or rituals. What is important is not conceptual understanding, but vivid wisdom, the ability to react compassionately, the ability to let go of all attachments in order to see the true nature of reality clearly. In that morning, as the morning light touched the peaks and the monastery awoke, an important lesson of compassion, wisdom, and insight was taught, not through the sermon, but through the direct action of the abbot. The lesson is not in doing the work or observing the ritual, but in the ability to see the truth beyond the forms, to be willing to act out of radical compassion, even if it challenges every belief, every understanding, every knowledge we have ever held. And when all that is precious seems to have to be sacrificed, that's when true wisdom is revealed. Now let's move on to a story about the nature of searching and searching, about the path to finding something that seems far away, but is actually always in front of us. This is the story of a master sculptor who has spent his life uncovering the secrets hidden in stone, to unleash the beauty hidden in raw matter. In a bustling quarry beneath towering mountains, the sculptor moves among the marble blocks, his eyes gleaming with the practice of a man who has coaxed beauty from stone for decades. The morning sun shone a golden light through the quarry, illuminating each block of rock that seemed to whisper its story, and he listened, weathered hands sliding over the smooth surface, as if listening to every latent breath in the rock. Aha, he said, feeling each stone. There was a heroic figure trapped in that work, and a saint trapped inside the other. His reputation was built precisely from this rare ability, the ability to look deeper than the surface of matter, to see the true nature waiting to be unleashed. But on that morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For more than 40 years, he searched for something special, a perfect stone from which he could create the masterpiece of his life, a glorious Buddha statue, an embodiment of enlightenment and compassion. His energy was gradually running out, and the perfect Buddha stone was still hidden, like a secret that he did not want to reveal. He traveled all over the world's great quarries, consulting experts, hiring seasoned people to survey remote areas, but nowhere was there a stone that allowed him to unleash the absolute image of the Buddha. Feeling the weight of a lifelong task, the sculptor turned to a local Zen monk, heading a small temple at the end of the street. The temple is humble with a peaceful courtyard, a stone well surrounded by silky green moss, where he bows deeply to the master. Master, he said, I have been searching for 40 years to find the perfect stone to carve the Buddha. The monk listened. His eyes were kind, and he smiled softly, which made the sculptor both confused and hopeful. No problem, the monk said, so simple that it surprised him. You mean, Can you tell me where I can find the perfect material for me to liberate the Buddha of my dreams?" The sculptor asked, his voice full of excitement. "Of course," the monk replied. "Where?" The monk raised his hand, pointing to the well in the courtyard. "Over there," he said. The sculptor hurried to the well, looked down at the dark water, and realized the miracle. The reflection in the water was his face, the image of the seeker looking back at himself. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that if you can't find the truth where you stand, where else do you expect to find it? The profound message emerges. What we desperately seek is often not located far away, not in perfect circumstances, but in our very foundation, in the very consciousness that is making the search. The sculptor examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, but never thought that it was this awareness, observation, and search experience that was the perfect material for awakening. Zen Buddhism teaches that people often delay happiness, wait for the perfect situation, such as waiting for a promotion, waiting to meet the ideal lover, waiting for the perfect final condition. But this is the same thing as finding the Buddha's mass everywhere, except that the only place where it can be found, the reflection in oneself. Zen Master Hangpo teaches that your daily mind is the path. The sculptor's insight is not the need to become something different, but the realization of what he already is. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature is not out of context, but in awareness and creativity, in seeing beauty and liberating it. The rock well, with its calm water, becomes a symbol of the stop in consciousness, where the search ends and begins. When we stop looking outward and look deep within, we realize that the seeker and the seeker are inherently one. In Zen practice, we refer to the primordial face, the core essence that exists before being shaped by social and conceptual stereotypes. This face is not hidden far away, but looks back at us in every mirror, every moment of real presence. When you recognize the Buddha nature in yourself, when you see it in the possibility of wonder, in the longing for the truth, or simply in the perception of these words, you have touched the essential nature of everything. As the Buddha taught, look inward. You are the Buddha. The masterpiece you are looking for is not in perfect materials, but in the awareness that the artist, the art, and the ability to judge beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. From the story of the search, we move on to the story of the ghosts created by the mind, the ghosts that emerge from fear, guilt, and unresolved conditions. A man who lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years. Their love is deep, sincere, and companionship is a source of daily joy. But fate was grim. She was seriously ill. On her hospital bed, her breathing shallow and her strength weakened, she clutched her husband's hand with incredible strength, eyes filled with love and fear. "My dear," she whispered, "promise me that when I'm gone, I won't see any other women. Be faithful to my memories forever. Otherwise, I will return from the grave to haunt you." Heartbroken by her words and imminent passing, the husband agreed, for in that moment of grief and love, he would do anything to ease her pain and honor their relationship. For several months after her death, the widow kept her promise to avoid social gatherings, to decline invitations, and to turn away from other women's ability to accompany them. His world became small, lonely, filled only with work and memories. As time passed, the pain subsided, and he was pulled back into the world of the living. At a local market, he meets a new, kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he was attracted to this man. Conversations gradually lead to friendship. Friendship turns into affection. Eventually, despite guilt and inner conflict, he falls in love again. And on the night of the engagement, the worst fears come true. The room becomes cold, and in front of him is the figure of his deceased wife, pale face, eyes shining with accusation. "You've broken your promise to me," she said, her voice cold as a grave. "You have betrayed love and disgraced my memory." But what really scares the man is not just her appearance, but her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she returned, detailing everything that had happened between him and her new lover. She describes private moments, revealing the most intimate exchanges. Nothing hides. The obsession becomes intense, leaving the man with insomnia, dark circles in his eyes, trembling hands, and the new relationship threatened under the weight of horror and exhaustion. Desperate, he turned to a Zen master in a temple near the village. "Master," he trembled, recounting the story, "the ghost of the wife appears every night, knows everything I do, says every word I say, repeats every conversation exactly as it happened. I'm going crazy." The Zen master listened, stroked his beard thoughtfully, and smiled. "This is really a very intelligent ghost. You should admire such supernatural intelligence. But I'll show you what to do when she shows up tonight." That night, when the room became cold, the ghost appeared, and the man followed the instructions. "You are indeed a wise and all-knowing soul," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. If you possess such incredible power, you can answer a simple question for me." The ghost replied coldly, "Ask your question." The man put his hand down to the beanbag near the bed, scooped up a handful and raised it. "Tell me how many beans I'm holding." The ghost opened its mouth, but could not speak. Its shape fluctuated, becoming blurry. For the first time, she was unsure, even confused. "I can't," she stammered, and like the morning mist touching the sunlight, she disappeared, never to return. Man is free to live in peace. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that we are what we think, and that all experiences arise from thought. Thought creates the world, and much of the suffering does not come from outside forces, but from ghosts created by our own minds. The ghost in this story is nothing more than sin and unresolved psychological conditioning, projecting outwardly. Inner critics, the ghosts of life, often speak in the voices of the past, parents, teachers, ex-partners. But their strength comes from the mind itself. The ghost knows every conversation because it is the man's own memories that replay to him, appearing when sin is strongest. In the practice of Zen, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what the mind adds. The man loves the newcomer, but the psychological condition says that this is betrayal. The wife is gone, but the unresolved pain and guilt make her psychologically present. The Zen master's solution is simple but wonderful. By asking the ghost to know what exists only in the present, the beans in his hands, the ghost mind is unpredictable, and its true nature is revealed, breaking the illusion. Zen master Charlotte Juko Beck taught, "Thinking is just thinking. They're not necessarily true. They're not necessarily important. They're not necessarily ours. The accusations of ghosts seem real, but they are only the product of the mind." Take a deep look at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry? Voices that claim power about your values, your choices, your future. These voices often claim to know things they cannot know. The Buddha taught, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." When we recognize that we create experiences through the stories we tell ourselves, we also have the power to challenge, examine, and free ourselves from those stories, and thus live with true wisdom and freedom. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, you may remember the man and his handful of sentient beings. Can you find the courage to ask these inner critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they can't answer? Can you realize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know much less than they claim? As the Buddha reminded, doubt everything. Find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power as soon as we stop feeding them faith. The moment we see what they really are, not supernatural visits, but creations of the mind, they can dissipate as easily as they appear. And now, we turn to another story about how the ego can hide so deeply even to ourselves. The story of a Tang Dynasty premier. In the great capital, where golden palaces rose in the moonlight, where scholars debated philosophy in quiet gardens, there was a man of extraordinary achievement. This prime minister earned his position for excellence in both military strategy and state governance, defending the empire from invaders and formulating policies that brought prosperity to millions of people. His fame reverberated throughout the land, and the emperor's council often sought his opinion. But despite his worldly success, he considered himself a humble student of Buddhist teachings. Each week, he left behind his silk robes, left behind important rituals and duties, dressed casually, and visited his Zen master in a humble temple on the outskirts of the city. There, amidst weathered wooden bars and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he sat in meditation and received guidance like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two becomes beautifully balanced. The teacher treats the excellent student without distinction or special respect, and the prime minister approaches the teacher with sincere humility. To observers, political rank seems to have nothing to do with their spiritual relationship, simply a wise teacher instructing a serious student. One autumn afternoon, as the golden leaf drifted through the temple window, the prime minister settled into a familiar position in front of him. After meditating, he asked a question that had been bothering him for a long time. In reverence of you, I have reflected on the nature of spiritual obstacles. Please explain the meaning of egotism according to Buddhist teachings. The teacher's attitude changed suddenly. His face was flushed, his eyes flashed with anger, and his voice was small but full of contempt. What kind of stupid question is that? Haven't you learned anything from all these visits? The prime minister was startled as if he had been hit. Never before had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His face was hot with anger, his jaw clenched, his body was filled with hurt pride, and his anger rose. How could a simple monk who had never ruled a province or commanded an army dare to say that? But then, suddenly like a storm, his expression softened. He smiled softly, and his warm voice returned. Sir, this is selfishness. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that the ego is the veil between man and ultimate truth. What emerges from this story is a profound lesson in the subtleties and persistence of a false sense of self. Even if we believe we are humble, the ego waits for the right opportunity to reveal its hidden power. Why is it so hard for us to identify our selfishness? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego, like our own shadow, is always present but rarely noticed because we look in the wrong direction. The ego is intelligent in camouflaging itself with spiritual clothing. We can meditate for years, study texts, develop compassion, and still retain a special sense of spirituality. The Prime Minister's ego is not clear in everyday practice. He was humble, respectful, and sincere. But when dignity is challenged, a sense of status and importance is threatened, the ego explodes with full power. This is the signature of the ego, not in the moment of calm, but in our reaction. In everyday life, you experience the same thing. A colleague interrupts, a driver interrupts, someone doubts your expertise. Defenses automatically kick in. These reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, which always protects the image of who we think we are. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Everyone is perfect in your own way, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox emphasizes the focus of working with the ego, at the same time fully accepting oneself and being willing to see through one's own self-deception. The ego thrives on both hatred and self-blame, but dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate observation. His ingenious method shows that sometimes the most effective guidance does not come through gentle words, but through direct confrontation with unconscious patterns. The shock of dignity being challenged creates a sudden moment of awareness, exposing the self-defense mechanisms that are at work beneath awareness. In the practice of Zen, we cultivate ego transparency, the ability to see through self-protection mechanisms as they arise. Not to get rid of the ego entirely, which is impossible and undesirable, but to develop a gentler relationship, recognizing its voice without automatically believing its stories. When you notice a moment of defensiveness, irritability, or hurt pride, you may see that this is not a flaw, but an opportunity to understand yourself deeply. The Buddha taught, "You only lose what is clinging." The ego is a collection of stories about who we think we are. When we release our grip, we discover the freedom beyond prison, the importance of the self. Next is the story of the difference between helping and holding, the story of two monks and the woman by the river. The two monks walked along the mountain road to a remote monastery where they were devoted practitioners, taking strict vows, including an oath to avoid physical contact with women. This does not stem from disrespect, but from the understanding that discipline helps to focus on spiritual growth. When they arrived at a rising river, the bridge damaged after the storm, they met a young woman standing unsteadily at the water's edge. The flow was strong, full of debris, and she obviously couldn't overcome it on her own. "Please, venerable monks," she called, "can one of you help me through these dangerous waters?" A stressed monk, his mind racing through the rules, trying to find reasons why he can't help, considering alternatives. The other monk looked at the real danger without hesitation, walked over, gently lifted her on her shoulders, carried her through the dangerous flow step by step, and put her to the shore safely. "Thank you," she bowed, continuing her path. The two monks continue their journey, but the atmosphere changes. The first monk was silent, his mind spinning over what he had just witnessed. As the hours passed, the tension increased, and finally he couldn't bear it. "Brother, I don't understand your behavior. We took the vows to avoid physical contact, but he carried the woman across the river. How can you break such a sacred oath?" The companion looked at him, smiling softly. "Brother, I put her on the other bank a few hours ago, but you are still carrying her in your mind." The Buddha's wisdom taught, holding anger is like holding a hot coal, intending to throw it at someone else, but you yourself get burned. We hold on to stories in our minds, forgetting that they are just images, memories, and predictions, not reality. These two stories, the Prime Minister's ego lesson and the actions of the two monks, all lead to the same wisdom. What we see, Our reactions, our worries, our guilt or outrage is mostly the creation of the mind, the ghosts we nurture, or the stories the ego tells us. Meditation teaches to see through them, to recognize their origin, not to let them control them. When we realize this, each moment becomes an opportunity to free ourselves from sin, anger, conceit, and live in our presence. Learning from the Prime Minister, from the two monks, from the ghosts and inner ghosts, we understand that wisdom comes not only from theory, but from direct experience, from the ability to observe and recognize automatic reactions, unconscious patterns. When we recognize the truth about the self, we are freer, no longer dominated by old stories, memories, or prejudices. Every action, every reaction is an opportunity to meditate, to realize that Buddha nature is present within ourselves, in every moment, in every thought and feeling. Finally, Zen Buddhism reminds us that we don't need to run after distant ideals. We don't need to be afraid of ghosts or run away from the ego, because everything already exists within us, just waiting to be realized. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When you understand this, you can breathe, observe, identify, and liberate, and live with freedom, compassion, and wisdom in every step of the way of life. This story reveals the profound difference between acts of compassion and spiritual engagement, between meeting current needs and carrying with them past events. Why do we often carry long-ended situations, replay scenarios, and nurture grievances that exist only in the mind? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of the suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from our failure to release experiences once they have passed. The first monk's agitation shows that strict adherence to rules that sometimes contradict the spirit of compassion inspired those rules. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and acted kindly immediately, then completely released the case. But the first monk retains the experience, allowing it to get heavier by the hour, step by step. Look at your tendencies. How many times do you repeat past conversations, nurture old grievances, rehearse in your mind situations that have ended? How much mental energy do you devote to carrying events that now only exist in memory? The woman crossed the river in just a few minutes, but the first monk carried her through her thoughts for an hour. This teaching applies much more broadly than breaking the rules. We retain the harsh words someone said years ago, old mistakes, embarrassing moments that no one remembers anymore. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich in possibilities and practical experiences, goes unnoticed because we are too busy embracing the ghosts of the past. In the practice of Zen, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when needed, and then went on completely. He doesn't worry about choosing right or wrong, doesn't think about other people's opinions, doesn't repeat things in his mind. The Zen master taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing is impermanent. It begins, serves its purpose, and ends. It is only the attachment of the first monk that causes the event to exist continuously in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may happen. Let go of what's happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax and rest. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that make you sad, decisions you regret, all exist now just because you keep picking them up and carrying them along. What does it feel like to put them down? Ironically, the monk who actually breaks the rule does not experience suffering about it. While the monk is perfectly compliant, he creates moments of excitement for himself. This proves that suffering does not come from action, but from thinking about action. When you notice your mind coming back to past events, old grievances, or situations that have ended, you can remember the example of the wise monk. Practice putting down whatever you are holding unnecessarily, discovering the lightness from traveling through life without the burden of the past. As the Buddha's wisdom reminds, in the end, there are only three things that matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Spiritual practice is not about following the perfect rule, but about responding appropriately to what is really present and then releasing it completely, making space for whatever happens next. As we continue our journey through Zen wisdom, we turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all possessions and status. This is the story of the inn that calls itself the palace. In ancient India, a famous spiritual teacher wandered from village to village, sharing the teachings of the Buddha. His reputation for wisdom and compassion spread throughout the country, reaching the ears of kings and nobles. One day, he arrives in the capital of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rises above the bustling street like a crown set with jewels. The palace is truly a wonder to behold. The walls are masoned with the finest marble. The gemstone mosaics catch and reflect the light into a vibrantly colored cascade. The garden is filled with exotic flowers, fountains flowing around. Guards in glittering armor stand all over the grounds. Obviously, this is the residence of the rich and powerful. The teacher approached the entrance with the calm dignity that he brought to every meeting, whether with the king or begging. The soldiers recognized him by his simple cloak and serene, uninhibited presence. The news of his arrival quickly reached the king, who were instructed to allow him to pass. Through a corridor lined with silk carpets and golden statues, the teacher came to the throne room, where the king sat on an intricately carved chair on a marble floor, his courtiers surrounding the glittering throne. The king, a middle-aged man, dressed in a dark purple silk robe and a diamond gold crown, looked up as he entered. He was looking forward to the visit, though not sure what would happen. "What do you want?" asked the king directly, his voice of authority accustomed to instant answers and obedience. He bowed respectfully, but said with quiet confidence, "Your Majesty, I want a place to sleep in this inn." The courtier was surprised. The king's eyebrows were raised, and his expression changed from curiosity to confusion. "This is not an inn," the king said, pointing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler who has held royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. May I ask your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his voice a little defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before he died. This palace is his seat of power, as it is now mine." "And who possessed it before him?" he asked, his voice genuinely concerned. "My grandfather," said the king, beginning to sense where the question might lead. "He also ruled from this throne and died." The teacher stopped, letting the weight of words settle in the large room. The courtiers were silent, feeling the profound direction of the conversation. Even the king waited, almost in spite of himself. Finally, the teacher said with clarity that spread throughout the room, "This place is where people live temporarily and then move on." Complete silence. The king sat motionless, his words piercing layers of assumptions and identities he had never doubted. The courtiers froze as if witnessing something beyond common understanding. The Buddha taught, all things that are conditioned are impermanent. Be diligent in your salvation. This profound truth is revealed in his question about the inn calling itself a palace. Why do we cling so intensely to possessions and status when they are temporary in nature? Zen explains that attachment creates suffering because it contradicts the reality of impermanence. Everything we think we possess, including bodies and identities, is temporary. Look at your experience, your home, your car, your job title, your bank account. It's all just a temporary arrangement. You dwell in them for a while and then continue as others before you and will dwell after you. This does not mean being indifferent to responsibility or careless with assets. It invites us to take lightly, to recognize the transient nature. The king's palace is magnificent, serving an important function, but also unmistakably being a temporary inn where the residence is located a few hours before departure. Identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering. When we forget the impermanent nature of the position, parents, professionals, homeowners, students, we worry about trying to maintain the impossible. Perhaps it is professional identity, relationships, health, spiritual achievement. Each person is precious but changeable. The director retires, the parents are empty, the student becomes the teacher, the healthy person faces the disease. These transitions are not failures, but are the natural expression of impermanence. Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. Impermanence is not to be feared, but to celebrate, for nothing lasts forever. Suffering can turn into joy. A closed heart is open to love. Even the most entrenched stereotype can turn wise. In Zen practice, we cultivate non-attachment, deep but gentle concern. It does not mean becoming cold or indifferent, but learning to love without clinging, to work without clinging, to enjoy without asking for eternity. His understanding penetrates the illusion that everyone is a permanent owner. All are temporary guests in the inn to exist, borrowing roles and assets in a short time. Recognizing this brings either despair or liberation depending on the reception. The Buddha taught, everything is impermanent. Accomplish as many virtues as you can. This teaching encourages us not to waste temporary time, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion when the opportunity arises. Tonight, as you rest in the temporary, amidst temporary possessions, you may feel the profound freedom from realizing the fleeting nature, which can increase appreciation rather than diminish it. Taught of all footprints, elephant footprints are supreme. Similarly, in all meditation, death is ultimate. Remembering the temporary nature of the time in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment, to practice love and awareness, to let go and be free. Let's continue our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes the outer experience. This is the story of two towns located close to each other in a bustling market where street vendors, tourists, and locals stop to rest, exchange, and look for opportunities in everyday life. A wise Zen master set up a modest tea stall in the middle of the market, where he not only served drinking water, but also bestowed practical wisdom on those who came to face life's transitions, uncertainties, and turning points. His reputation for sensitivity and calmness spread throughout the region, and people came to the tea house not only to refresh their thirst, but also to find a new perspective, a temporary peace in the midst of the constant changes of the world. On a special day, two men approached the tea stand, each carrying the same question. but the light they shine on the world around them is profoundly different. They were both strangers to the market, to the two towns, and they both sought guidance on whether or not this place could become their new home. The first man comes forward with a strain on his face, shoulders carrying the burden of frustration accumulated over the years. His steps were heavy, his gaze swept through everything, doubting and judging, finding fault with everything he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he declared, his voice hoarse and sharp, without any preamble or question. The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, not only listening to the words, but also feeling the quality of the energy he was carrying. Instead of immediately giving a description of the town, the teacher asks his own question. "What is your old town like?" The first man responded immediately, as if he had practiced for a long time, a familiar complaint filling his voice. "It's horrible," he said with pronounced bitterness. "Everyone is hateful and unfriendly. Neighbors don't care. The shopkeepers are rude and selfish. I can't stand being there anymore." The teacher nodded contemplatively, but his eyes were still full of compassion, not reacting to the negativity he was pouring out. "This town is very similar," he said simply, his voice even. "I don't think you should move here." The man's face darkened. His frustration and tension rose, and without saying another word, he turned away, muttering that this place was probably as bad as anywhere else he had ever lived. As soon as the first man left, the second approached the tea counter. The second one is completely different. He walked freely, curiously and openly, his eyes sparkling with appreciation rather than judgment. When he smiled at the stall owner, it seemed to come from a very warm place. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What is it like?" The Zen master looked at him with careful attention, just like the first, choosing to understand the inner context before making any judgments. "How is your old town?" he asked. The second man pondered slowly, a smile on his face as he remembered his old town. "It's wonderful," he said, his voice full of love. "People are very friendly and helpful. Neighbors care about each other. Merchants know each person by name, have a real sense of community. I'm happy there. I'm just considering change because I want to experience new adventures and opportunities." The teacher smiled deliberately. His eyes lit up as he said, "This town is very similar." The second man walked with satisfaction, a smile on his lips and a gentle footstep, seemingly seeing possibilities and connections in the new environment, in stark contrast to the first man's suspicions. The Buddha's wisdom teaches that everything we are results from what we think. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This profound truth is reflected in the teacher's seemingly conflicted reaction to the two visitors. He gave the same answer to both because he realized that their questions revealed more about their inner state than about their external reality. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and frustration in the same environment? Buddhist psychology explains that cognitive filters, formed from our habitual mental patterns, shape our experiences in a profound way. We pay attention to evidence that confirms current beliefs while discarding conflicting information. The first man carried a negative tendency, interpreting ambiguous situations in the worst possible way. His mind is like a magnet for negative experiences, not because of the hostile world, but because it is the way he is conditioned to see the world. The latter tends to be the opposite, assuming the best in others and seeking positive connection. His mind is in harmony with kindness and ability. In everyday life, how does this happen? Two people may work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction. The other sees opportunities for mentorship, collaboration, and growth. Not all experiences are positive or objective that don't matter. This illustrates the power of mental habits in shaping our living reality. As Zen master John Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, you are there. We carry the weather inside, and it colors everything that comes our way." The wisdom of the teacher lies in realizing that changing the external position cannot solve the problem of the first man. If he moves to a new town with the same negative filter, he will replicate the disappointments he is seeking to avoid. This principle has profound implications for how we approach change and problem solving. When dissatisfied with circumstances, the instinct is to change external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that create dissatisfaction, we will only create the same problems in the new environment. This principle also works in a positive direction. As we cultivate habits of gratitude, curiosity, and goodwill, we will see evidence to support those views. The world doesn't magically change, but the ability to see positive qualities expands dramatically. As you reflect on your own experiences with your community, work, and relationships, you can recognize the interpretive lens through which you often view interactions. Are you like the first man, looking for problems and frustrations, or the second, looking for connections and opportunities? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. The most powerful tool for transforming external experience lies not in changing circumstances, but in changing the quality of perception that we bring to whatever circumstance we encounter. Looking deeper, this story is not just about two tourists or two towns. It is a reflection of each of our lives, where perceptions, attitudes, and mental patterns shape how we experience every moment. External changes, new places to live, jobs, social environments, can be catalysts, but they can't change the way we perceive them if we don't change the inner self. Those who practice awareness, attention, and compassion begin to realize that they can find joy, opportunity, and connection even in seemingly difficult circumstances. And it's that inner change that really creates miracles, not external changes. The story of the two travelers, the two towns, and the Zen master's humble tea stand reminds us that every experience we encounter is illuminated by our minds. When entering a new environment, look with curious eyes, with gratitude and goodwill. When things get tough, realize that how we choose to perceive and react is what determines our experience. The world is not just what the outside eye sees. It is a reflection of our soul, attitudes, and mental habits. And finally, the story teaches that freedom and happiness don't lie in perfect circumstances, but in being able to see beautiful, feel good, and make connections right where you are. When we learn to master our inner selves, we don't just walk through the town, but through life with peace and deep awareness, realizing that it's the soul, not the environment, that shapes our experience. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us discover a story about the paradox of absolute truth, a story that teaches not only about the teachings, but also about how we see ourselves and how we understand reality. This is a lesson in hermit and conflicting teachings, one of the most profound themes of Zen Buddhism, where the real meaning is not in words, but in the direct experience of each person. Once upon a time, in a remote mountainous area, There was a famous Zen master who was sought by people from all over the world for his deep wisdom and spiritual transformation. Day after day, his disciples gathered around him, each hoping to find the light that would lead them to enlightenment. Of all the teachings, there is one lesson that the Zen master considers to be the most quintessential and fundamental. The Buddha is your own mind. He spoke to his disciples with absolute conviction, in a voice that was both gentle and sure. This is the highest truth I can share. Stop looking outside of what you already have. There is no need to search in temples or books. What you are looking for, the enlightened nature, is already in your mind. Realize this. You will be free. A young monk who has just entered the path of practice feels full and deep about this teaching. The idea that enlightenment is not something that needs to be attained from the outside, but the innate nature of one's own mind, illuminated every question and wonder he ever held. Excitement spread in him like a new light, and the determination to devote a lifetime to the realization of this truth flourished. With that determination, the young monk decided to withdraw from the monastery and his classmates, looking for a secluded cave in the mountains where he could meditate without being distracted. 20 years passed in silence and solitude. Every day, he meditates, observes the flow of thought, examines every aspect of his mind, probes the consciousness and profound nature of the teaching that the Buddha is his own mind. He explored, experienced, and it seemed that every step, every breath, brought him closer to full understanding. During his lonely years, he felt the stillness of the nature around him, the sound of the wind rustling through the pine forests, the light dancing on the cliffs, the sound of streams gurgling from the mountainside. It's all like blending into a meditative rhythm, where time becomes soft and the present becomes infinite. Every moment is a discovery, an integration into the nature of reality, where the distinction between the inner and the outside gradually blurs. One morning, as the sun had just risen, a traveling monk stumbled through the forest near the cave. The hermit, after years of solitude, felt a surge of joy when he met another practitioner from the same teacher. He stepped out, greeting the traveler with a bright smile, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's wonderful to meet a classmate," he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the stillness of the mountains. The traveler, who had also studied with the famous teacher, replied with respect and joy. "Please tell me what you know about our master's greatest teaching," he said. The hermit felt like both of their souls met in a moment of tune. "I have spent 20 years contemplating your profound insight that the Buddha is your own mind," he replied, his eyes shining with the pride and certainty that 20 years of solitude had cultivated. But the answer from the traveling monk stunned him. "Ah, yes, our teacher is indeed very clear on this subject," the traveler said, but then continued in an enthusiastic and sincere voice. "But my greatest teaching, which he emphasized above all, is that Buddha is not your mind." Like the ground shifting beneath his feet, the hermit stood silently, a sense of dizziness filling his mind. 20 years of dedicated cultivation, discovery, meditation on every breath, every thought, and now a simple sentence upended the entire faith he had cultivated. He felt as if he had fallen into a profound paradox that the ordinary mind could hardly explain. How could the deepest teaching be both absolute truth and be denied by another teaching from the same teacher? As the Buddha once said, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Even the most profound teachings are only means, not ultimate truths. We cling to teachings that forget that their purpose is to awaken, not to become a fixed belief. Attachment to the teachings, however profound, sometimes becomes an obstacle, hindering the direct and natural awareness they are meant to inspire. Hermit confusion opens up a fundamental aspect of Zen teaching. Masters often use contradictory teachings to prevent students from turning understanding into rigid beliefs. The aim is not to provide the final answer, but to exhaust the tendency to hold, creating space for direct awareness beyond all words. Both teachings, Buddha is your mind and Buddha is not your mind, serve a function depending on the needs of the student. For the outward seeker, the first teaching directs attention inward. For those who are firmly attached to the idea of possessing Buddha nature, the second teaching breaks down subtle attachment. Imagine our relationship with philosophy or divine doctrine. How many times do we turn useful suggestions into absolute truth and defend it against conflicting views? The hermit's 20-year retreat, however dedicated and sincere, shows that even correct understanding can become limited if held too rigid. In Zen practice, all teachings are seen as instrumental, temporary, and useful in certain circumstances, but not as final truth. Just as medicine is used to cure a disease and then no longer needed, the apparent contradiction of the master is not a real contradiction, but a skillful means. Whichever method is helpful to students will break up that personal confusion. Zen Master Hangpo once said, "Foolish people reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The hermit was so invested in thinking about the teachings that he lost touch with the direct experience it indicated. The Buddha taught, don't believe anything just because you hear it. Don't believe tradition just because it's passed down. But when observing and analyzing what is consistent with reason and beneficial to one person and everyone, accept it and live according to it. This applies even to the Buddha's words and the most reverent Zen teachings. Truth is not in a perfect formula, which lies in the awakening that transcends all formulas. Take a deep look at your cherished beliefs and understandings. Can you hold on to insights so deep that they become a barrier to deeper awareness? What does it mean to receive all doctrine as temporary instruments rather than final truth? In the evening, as you reflect on the various teachings and philosophies that have shaped your perception, you can recognize the hermit's surprise at discovering the paradox he expects to be confirmed. Can you keep valuable insights light enough for them to survive and function instead of becoming rigid dogma? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us, truth has no form. How can it be organized? Whether the Buddha is your mind or not, whether the teachings are true or false, the reality to which they are directed transcends all concepts available in this moment to anyone who is willing to look beyond their fingers just to see the moon. As we wrap up tonight's time, pay attention to your inner sense of tranquility. This peace is not something to be sought. It always exists as long as you pay attention. The profound stillness from this story is not just in words, but in the moment, in your breath, in your body and mind. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Think about it. Peace does not come from the outside world. It develops from the mind itself and can be called out at any time just by breathing and paying attention. Every story tonight, from the two tourists in town to the hermit in the cave, gently points out that we feel better when we stop struggling, find freedom when we let go, and gain peace in seeing things as clearly as they are. If the mind wanders, That's perfectly fine. These stories have found a place in your mind and will always be there to support you. As you prepare to go to bed, remember that these stories don't just give you a new place to go, but a new way to live more simply by paying attention to yourself. In quiet moments, take a break. Feel the breath. Feel the stillness in the body. You don't have to do anything. You're where you need to be. This reminds us that you don't need to look for wisdom in that particular place. It comes when you pay attention to your own life. As you drift away in your sleep, carry this feeling of calm. Let it be a quiet, stable presence in the days ahead, supporting you through challenges and beautiful moments. May this peace always be with you. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey at the Monk Tells Bedtime Stories. Sleep well. But the answer from the traveling monk stunned him. Ah, yes, our teacher is indeed very clear on this subject, the traveler said, but then continued in an enthusiastic and sincere voice. But my greatest teaching, which he emphasized above all, is that Buddha is not your mind. Like the ground shifting beneath his feet, the hermit stood silently, a sense of dizziness filling his mind. 20 years of dedicated cultivation, discovery, meditation on every breath, every thought, and now a simple sentence upended the entire faith he had cultivated. He felt as if he had fallen into a profound paradox that the ordinary mind could hardly explain. How could the deepest teaching be both absolute truth and be denied by another teaching from the same teacher? As the Buddha once said, "The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon." Even the most profound teachings are only means, not ultimate truths. We cling to teachings that forget that their purpose is to awaken, not to become a fixed belief. Attachment to the teachings, however profound, sometimes becomes an obstacle, hindering the direct and natural awareness they are meant to inspire. Hermit confusion opens up a fundamental aspect of Zen teaching. Masters often use contradictory teachings to prevent students from turning understanding into rigid beliefs. The aim is not to provide the final answer, but to exhaust the tendency to hold, creating space for direct awareness beyond all words. Both teachings, Buddha is your mind and Buddha is not your mind, serve a function depending on the needs of the student. For the outward seeker, the first teaching directs attention inward. For those who are firmly attached to the idea of possessing Buddha nature, the second teaching breaks down subtle attachment. Imagine our relationship with philosophy or divine doctrine. How many times do we turn useful suggestions into absolute truth and defend it against conflicting views? The hermit's 20-year retreat, however dedicated and sincere, shows that even correct understanding can become limited if held too rigid. In Zen practice, all teachings are seen as instrumental, temporary, and useful in certain circumstances, but not as final truth. Just as medicine is used to cure a disease and then no longer needed, the apparent contradiction of the master is not a real contradiction, but a skillful means. Whichever method is helpful to students will break up that personal confusion. Zen master Hangpo once said, "Foolish people reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The hermit was so invested in thinking about the teachings that he lost touch with the direct experience it indicated. The Buddha taught, don't believe anything just because you hear it. Don't believe tradition just because it's passed down. But when observing and analyzing what is consistent with reason and beneficial to one person and everyone, accept it and live according to it. This applies even to the Buddha's words and the most reverent Zen teachings. Truth is not in a perfect formula, which lies in the awakening that transcends all formulas. Take a deep look at your cherished beliefs and understandings. Can you hold on to insights so deep that they become a barrier to deeper awareness? What does it mean to receive all doctrine as temporary instruments rather than final truth? In the evening, as you reflect on the various teachings and philosophies that have shaped your perception, you can recognize the hermit's surprise at discovering the paradox he expects to be confirmed. Can you keep valuable insights light enough for them to survive and function instead of becoming rigid dogma? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us, truth has no form. How can it be organized? Whether the Buddha is your mind or not, whether the teachings are true or false, the reality to which they are directed transcends all concepts available in this moment to anyone who is willing to look beyond their fingers just to see the moon. As we wrap up tonight's time, pay attention to your inner sense of tranquility. This peace is not something to be sought. It always exists as long as you pay attention. The profound stillness from this story is not just in words, but in the moment, in your breath, in your body and mind. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Think about it. Peace does not come from the outside world. It develops from the mind itself and can be called out at any time just by breathing and paying attention. Every story tonight, from the two tourists in town to the hermit in the cave, gently points out that we feel better when we stop struggling, find freedom when we let go, and gain peace in seeing things as clearly as they are. If the mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. These stories have found a place in your mind and will always be there to support you. As you prepare to go to bed, remember that these stories don't just give you a new place to go, but a new way to live more simply by paying attention to yourself. In quiet moments, take a break, feel the breath, feel the stillness in the body. You don't have to do anything. You're where you need to be. This reminds us that you don't need to look for wisdom in that particular place. It comes when you pay attention to your own life. As you drift away in your sleep, carry this feeling of calm. Let it be a quiet, stable presence in the days ahead, supporting you through challenges and beautiful moments. May this peace always be with you. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey at the Monk Tells Bedtime Stories. Sleep well.